Chapter 268. The Will of the Upper Echelons? When Sword Demon said this word, Wang Lu became silent. It was an unexpected explanation. Sword Demon's words couldn't be completely trusted, but since things had come to this point, there was no better choice but to listen carefully. Thus, Wang Lu gradually extinguished his fighting spirit and quietly accepted the world's recovery. The clouds in front of him broke through the sky, revealing a bright light. The traces left by Sword Demon had all disappeared. As for whether it was a temporary hibernation or a permanent disappearance, it was unknown for the time being. In a valley, Sword Spirit Autumn Beam was quietly lying on a clear lake. It seemed that she had overexerted herself and hadn't suffered any serious injuries. Wang Lu inwardly heaved a sigh of relief. The feeling of escaping from death was not as good as he imagined it to be. The ups and downs did not all bring pleasure. Although this time, he managed to pull back a bit, but compared to his counterattack, he still preferred to crush his opponent. Putting down the waves in his heart, Wang Lu decided to listen to Sword Demon's explanation. Where should I start? After a moment of silence, Sword Demon shook his head in a self-deprecating manner. Because I really didn't expect you to pass. I didn't even prepare an explanation, so I'll just say whatever comes to my mind. With that, Sword Demon restrained his expression and said in a deep voice, In fact, you raised an excellent question before, but unfortunately, you were interrupted by Sword God before you could go any deeper. At that time, you asked me why I went through so much trouble to come back from death. In fact, when I used Bai Li's Earthline to fight the 4 and 9 Heavenly Tribulation, I already had the will to die. At that time, I spent no less than 20 years preparing for it. When I raised my sword to fight the Heavenly Tribulation, I even felt that if I didn't die in that battle, I would have wasted the 20 years of hard work. Coming back from death was originally not part of my plan. Wang Lu said, Didn't you say that you died with remaining grievances because you were tainted by the world's wish power? The Sword Demon said, That's right. Being contaminated by the world's power of will before my death was completely out of my expectation. But because it was out of my expectation, I made all kinds of preparations in the past 20 years, but I never made any arrangements for this. At that time, I was simply helpless. In fact, this principle isn't difficult to see through. In this sword tomb, the swords are divided into yin and yang, and there's also the creation of life and death. How could it be arranged by someone who's about to die? Hearing this, Wang Lu finally understood. So you asked someone else for help? With your temperament, you fought alone against the Heavenly Tribulation, but now you're willing to lower your head to others when death is at hand. Zhong Shengming coldly said, What a joke! When have I, Zhong Shengming, ever lowered my head to anyone? They were the ones who approached me and offered me a deal. Someone who has the qualifications to make a deal with you and raise conditions must not be an ordinary person, right? If it's a bunch of incompetent people trying to take advantage of the situation, I'll be able to destroy their souls even if I'm severely injured and on the verge of death. In fact, it was a group of Dixian that proposed a deal with me. Dixian? What's that? Sword Demon sneered and said, They're just a bunch of arrogant people who don't know how to appreciate favors. You'll know the specifics later. I'll continue first. At that time, they found me and promised to help me solve the problem of the vow erosion, and in return, I had to do them a favor. Guarding the tomb? More or less. They wanted me to choose a successor for them. Successor? Inherit what? What conditions do I need to meet? Sword Demon said, I don't remember the specific conditions. In fact, they didn't say it in detail. After all, as a gatekeeper, I have to experience a transformation between life and death. My primordial spirit will gather and disperse once, and my memory will inevitably be lost. Therefore, only one basic condition was established at that time. If I can choose this person, I can obtain complete freedom. Speaking up to this point, Sword Demon further explained, in order to prevent me from keeping my promise, this sword tomb was built with restrictions. Before finding a suitable successor, this layer is absolutely sealed, and one can only enter but not leave. Wang Lu nodded. And then? Sword Demon sneered. And then everything became a mess. According to their plan, I should have resuscitation in a few decades, or at most a few hundred years. And there were enough materials left in the sword tomb for me to destroy the sword god and reunite my primordial spirit. After that, as long as I try my best to find a successor who satisfies the conditions, everyone will be happy. But in fact, my resuscitation will be 10,000 years later, and the materials for me to use will vanish into thin air. If not for you uninvited guests. Hee. Wang Lu asked, since the value of our existence is so high, what about the possession thing? Sword Demon said, isn't this a matter of course? When you resuscitation, you find that everything in the original plan has become a mess. Can you expect that the next step will be the same as before? I found a successor for him, but what if the sword tomb still doesn't let him go? So instead of pinning my hopes on the incompetent arrangement of a group of incompetent Dixian, it's better for me to do it myself. But it's not easy to break through the restriction of the Dixian level in the primordial spirit state. Wang Lu was silent for a while. And senior sister and I just happened to provide you with an opportunity. Yes, although my cultivation is still shallow, I have the void spirit root and the sword spirit root. Both of them are top-notch aptitudes. Even if this world is isolated from the great Tao, my primordial spirit has long carried my own Tao. Once I integrate your bodies, I will be able to break out in less than 3 years. Although the Dixian's realm is high, I don't care about it. Wang Lu asked, what about now? Now. Sword Demon smiled. Isn't the situation very obvious? You're lucky to meet the conditions to become a successor. And according to the restriction of this place, I can't make a move on a qualified successor. So consider yourself lucky. Wang Lu asked, what are the qualifications for a qualified successor? It's very simple, as long as I find him pleasing to the eye. Sword Demon said indifferently. Wang Lu was silent for a long time. He couldn't find anything to complain about, because there were too many things to complain about. First of all, as long as he was pleasing to the eye? What kind of standard was that? Was the group of Dixian that had signed a contract with him crazy? Secondly, if I'm pleasing to the eye, then I'm qualified. In other words, for a long time, you've been displeased with me? To think that you would pretend to be a hero of the valley and pass on your skills to me. Of course. Now it seems that you didn't have good intentions when you taught me the sky-splitting divine sword. And most importantly, now that I've suddenly passed, does that mean that you've suddenly found me pleasing to the eye? In other words, you were forced into the path of mutual destruction by me. TSK, can a test of life and death so easily shake a person's sense of beauty? Aren't they a little too afraid of death? Now that I'm qualified, it means that you find me pleasing to the eye. But you're sneering one moment and shaking your head the next. It looks like you're absolutely irreconcilable with me. How is that pleasing to the eye? Or could it be that the nature of Bai Li Sword Demon is at Sundara? Seeing Wang Lu's silence, Sword Demon also guessed what he was thinking. For me, your void spirit root, your non-phase method, and your crooked ideas are certainly interesting, but that's all. I've been cultivating for thousands of years, and I've seen too many things. Speaking to this, Sword Demon paused. However, the number of people who can force me into a dead end can be counted on one's fingers. I, Zhong Shengming, have always been unrestrained, but I have my respect for the strong. Since you can do this, you can barely enter my eyes. Whether I'm willing or not, rules are rules. They're not rules set by others, but the rules that I've abided by for thousands of years. As for fear of death? Sword Demon smiled and didn't try to argue further. Let's get back to the point. Since you've become the successor, you have the right to know the truth about this sword tomb. That is, the thing that you're going to inherit. Wang Lu nodded. His heart was filled with expectation. According to the Sword Devil, the people who came to him before he died were a group of Earth Immortals. Although he had never heard of the word Earth Immortal, he could understand it from the literal meaning. Since they had the word immortal in their name, they should not be weak trash. They were probably below the true immortal realm and above the mortal world? Not to mention that Sword Demon also admitted that they were a group of strong people that he had to take seriously. Moreover, they were able to set up the Yin and Yang division and other formidable array and restriction, so their strength was beyond doubt. And how precious would the thing left behind by such a group of people be? After all, even Zhong Shangming was just the gatekeeper of the inheritance. I haven't seen the specific content of the inheritance, but look at this, and you'll understand everything. But before that, I have to confirm it with you. Sword Demon's expression was unusually serious. His awe-inspiring eyes even made Wang Lu suspect that at any time, he would turn against him and kill him. Of course, Sword Demon didn't do that. Instead, he asked a simple question. Are you sure you want to know all this? You still have the chance to give up now. I won't suddenly dislike you because of this. While Wang Lu was muttering to himself, Sword Demon said, with your ability, you should be able to see the problem here. What are the Dixian? Since they have the ability to make me approve of them, why don't you know of their existence? And the rich inheritance they left behind, was it really just for the sake of nurturing their descendants? Then Sword Demon muttered to himself for a moment and added, there are some things I can't say directly, but I hope you can seriously think about it. For example, this question. In the past, Bai Li Province's devil wreaked havoc and stole from the horizon. Because of this, he was suppressed by the vault of heaven, and the path of cultivators to ascend to immortality was almost cut off. People say that the might of heaven cannot be violated, but how can there be such a vengeful heaven in this world? You mean? Wang Lu was inwardly startled. However, before he could ask the question, Sword Demon had already bypassed this topic. So, are you sure you want to know all this? Wang Lu didn't hesitate at all. Of course. Good. Sword Demon smiled again. It was hard to tell whether his smile was gratified or sarcastic. He waved his hand and summoned a ray of light to project it into Wang Lu's world. It was a map, and it was a very well-made three-dimensional map. It looked like an underground building divided into many layers. If he wasn't mistaken, it should be this ancient sword tomb. This is the sword tomb we are in. Sword Demon confirmed Wang Lu's guess, and then he waved his hand again. The next moment, 100 times more rays of light bloomed, and a net appeared in front of Wang Lu's eyes. A grand and spectacular net almost blotted out the sky and the earth, covering his field of vision. And the three-dimensional map of the sword tomb he saw just now just happened to step on a node of the network. And the nodes that were similar to the sword tomb were as numerous as the stars in the sky. Innumerable. These are the inheritances you've inherited, Sword Demon lightly said, and at the same time, he looked at Wang Lu's reaction with interest. Of course, the premise is that you can find the key to open the door. Chapter 269. The ancient sword tomb, which was regarded as a treasure by the 5 uniques of the Onxian League, was just an insignificant point in the huge network, while on the network, there were tens of thousands of nodes as dazzling as the stars. Is this the legacy of Dixian? For a time, Wang Lu fell into a great shock. In the face of this bright three-dimensional map of the galaxy, his own insignificance was particularly highlighted. Along the way, he had broken through several obstacles and experienced numerous difficulties and dangers, but it turned out that this was just a point in this huge star map, and there were countless similar tombs. Then, perhaps for this world, my existence is also insignificant? It seems that I stand at the cusp of the storm, the lead disciple of the 5 uniques of the Onxian League, the top elite of the younger generation. Perhaps in a vast unknown world, there are countless existences like me. My existence has no effect on this world. I'm just a dust-like mortal. Of course, no one was willing to live such a mediocre life. In addition to dedicating their limited life to the infinite ascension of millions of people, the only thing they could do now was probably to strive to find the truly extraordinary existence in this world, to prove that this world still has some cool points to speak of. For example, after returning to the Spirit Sword Mountain, through the Sex Channel, he would advertise to the world. If you have time traveler, reborn, or carry an old grandpa, come and find me. Then he would change his hairstyle every day, looking forward to Lu Li, who sat behind him in the Tang Cloud Hall class, to strike up a conversation with him and so on. No, the role seems to be wrong. In short, it took Wang Lu some time to calm down the shock in his heart. Despite his 10 years of immortal cultivation and having seen a lot of things, what he saw now had really exceeded the bottom line of his tolerance. Is this the real unfolding of God? However, although he was surprised, Wang Lu quickly recovered his professional thinking ability. Although he was shocked, since the matter was presented in front of him, the next thing to do was to analyze the principle behind it. Ruling out the possibility of Zhong Shengming talking nonsense, he decided to accept his statement for the time being. Then, what was the origin of the group of Dixian people that Zhong Shengming jokingly called as ignorant people? If each of the tens of millions of nodes on the network was of the same scale as the ancient sword tomb, then it was hard to imagine that such a terrifying group of tombs was the work of the mortal world. In terms of resources alone, in this ancient sword tomb, there were already several spirit treasures that had been excavated. Rumor has it that there were even more immortal treasures in the depths of this place. Then, wouldn't tens of thousands of nodes mean that there were tens of thousands of immortal treasures? Even the most affluent sect in the Wanxian League, Shangjing sect, could not find 100 immortal treasures even if they searched the entire sect. This was because Shangjing sect people had developed a large number of ancient heritage, and among these heritage that could really be used, less than 1/3 were only for exhibition. However, even if he didn't take the people of today as an example, even in the dream time when the immortal Tao was flourishing, there wasn't a single clan that could collect tens of thousands of immortal treasures. According to the records in the Stellar Sword scripture, the Stellar sect at its most arrogant time only possessed 1 to 200 immortal treasures. Amongst them, there were even fewer that could be considered to be counted, and most of them only had the name of immortal treasure in name. Tens of thousands of immortal treasures was not something that the 9 regions could bear. Could it be that Dixian was a true immortal from the lower realm? If he was not a true immortal, how could he have such a large scale of resources? Scared. Seeing Wang Lu was silent for a long time, how could Sword Demon not guess what he was thinking? When they first found me and showed me these things, I was just as shocked. However, when you understand the principle, you probably have a different idea. After Sword Demon finished speaking, he took some time to organize his words, and then said, strictly speaking, these tens of millions of Earth Immortals' legacies don't really exist. This map only shows a possibility of their existence. Possibility? Sword Demon said, no one, even if it's a true immortal, could possibly have such a huge amount of resources. Even if all the resources in the 9 regions are plucked, it's still impossible to forge tens of thousands of immortal treasures. Just the essence of metal and wood is enough to dry up the feng shui line in the 9 regions, not to mention the other resources needed to forge tens of thousands of immortal treasures. To put it simply, the material is limited. This truth was very easy to understand. The 9 regions was only so big, and there were only so many things which were clearly laid out in front of them. Of course, it was impossible for them to be inexhaustible. But in this world, there are still things that are inexhaustible. Sword Demon said and then looked at Wang Lu as if he was considering, waiting for his answer. Is it the Great Tao? Yes. Sword Demon nodded his head. Between heaven and earth, only this elusive Great Tao is inexhaustible, and can be taken by people. When you achieve the King Pill and initially condense the Great Tao, the magical power in your Jade Mansion can be endless, and you don't need to absorb it from the outside world. When you reach the Yuanying stage, you have the power of creation, and the key to this is the Great Tao. When you comprehend the Great Tao and conform to it, you have the ability to create something out of nothing. Wang Lu asked, but even if it conformed to the Great Tao, it's impossible to create tens of thousands of immortal treasures out of nothing. Yes, no one can create tens of thousands of immortal treasures out of nothing, because human strength is limited. The Great Tao is endless, and human strength is limited. But what if the Great Tao itself transforms into immortal treasures? Wang Lu asked, the Great Tao is heartless and treats all living things as straw dogs. So how could it be so considerate to create immortal treasures for cultivators? The Great Tao doesn't belong to my family. Isn't it said that the Great Tao rewards the diligent? What kind of explanation is this? This is not an explanation, but rather a supreme Great Tao that many people are unable to deeply understand. Sword Demon faintly smiled. In fact, if the efforts of cultivators are taken into account, it's not difficult to find that nothing in this world is really created out of nothing. In order to obtain an endless supply of magical power, cultivators have to go through a long period of bitter cultivation. The Great Tao rewards the diligent. Looking at it from another perspective, even if something is created out of nothing, it's just a way for the Great Tao to reward cultivators. Wang Lu nodded. As long as one works hard, there will be a reward? As long as one works hard, there will be a reward, of course, that's impossible. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many mediocre and incompetent people in this world. The Great Tao of heaven and earth is both generous and callous. For some people, it's cruel and merciless, but for others, it's generous to the point of creating something out of nothing. And this myriad graveyard is the latter. When Wang Lu heard this, he couldn't help but frown. Don't you think it's long-winded? Simply put, this myriad graveyard is a feedback mechanism created by the Dixian's great divine ability. Those immortal treasures don't already exist, but according to the program designed by the Dixians, one can obtain the immortal treasures that the Great Tao of heaven and earth gives back. After a pause, Wang Lu said, it's like teaching people to fish. Sword Demon sighed. Sure enough, you have a good perception. You're right, that's the case. In fact, these myriad graveyard doesn't even have a physical existence. It's just a feedback mechanism designed by the Dixians in combination with the great Tao of heaven and earth. When the conditions are met, the entrance to the myriad graveyard will be opened. Then, as the cultivator enters, the myriad graveyard will continuously improve its internal design. The overall idea is similar to the current sword tomb. The cultivator needs to pass through layers upon layers of tests and difficulties. And finally, the reward is based on the cultivator's efforts. Of course, this reward isn't fixed, but there's a general range. It's impossible to go through untold hardships to reach the deepest part, only to find a magical tool there. Wang Lu concluded, "Well, it's a random instance. I don't know what your so-called random instance is, but it seems that you already understand the concept of these myriad graveyard. Then let's move on to the next question. The inheritance of the Dixian is certainly considerable, but the premise is that you must be able to find the key to open the door." Wang Lu said, "Isn't the identity of the successor enough? If I still need to find the key, why would I ask you to guard the door?" Sword Demon said, "In theory, there really isn't a need to go through so much trouble. The key to open the entrance to the myriad graveyard is in my hands, but after 10,000 years, many things can no longer be seen according to the theoretical design." After a pause, Sword Demon said with a smile, "In short, the key is lost." "Lost?" "Yes, it's lost." Sword Demon repeated, "Before my primordial spirit dissipated, the Dixian placed the key in my line of sight, but when I resuscitated from my 10,000 years of sleep, the key has disappeared." In fact, it's not only the key that disappeared. Compared to 10,000 years ago, this ancient sword tomb is too different. There are quite a lot of missing parts, and even the core yin-yang sword division array almost went wrong. Wang Lu asked, "What's the reason?" "There are too many reasons. For example, the Dharma-ending tribulation that occurred 6,000 years ago, which shrouded the entire 9 regions. Although this ancient sword tomb exists independently, it may also have been affected, but the biggest possibility is that this place has been visited by someone." Sword Demon coldly stated his own judgment. "According to the original design of the Dixian, my slumber would only last for a few hundred years at most. Therefore, many of the designs in this place are only valid for a few hundred years. But in fact, it has been more than 10,000 years since the appearance of the sword tomb. During the slumber of the sword tomb, the concealment spell failed, and some tomb robbers found it and sneaked in. This is also very likely." Wang Lu was silent for a moment. "So, my current task is to find the key that I don't know when and where I lost it? Do you think this matter is reliable?" "But you have no other choice." Sword Demon said, "If you want to inherit the legacy of the Dixian, you must find the lost key. Of course, it's not like there are no clues at all." Sword Demon stretched out 3 fingers. 3 clues. First, the key has not been destroyed. It really does exist. In fact, the key itself cannot be completely destroyed. Once the old key is destroyed, the legacy of the Dixian will automatically generate a new key and appear in front of me. But since I don't see the key, either the mechanism designed by the Dixian has completely failed, or the key has been taken away by someone else. Second, the key is not an ordinary object. In terms of grade, it is at least an immortal treasure. It has the magical ability to split the heavens and the earth. And such a treasure, in theory, should not be unknown. Third, if you can't find any clues in the known area, you might as well look further. 16,000 years is enough for any changes to happen. After saying these 3 clues, Sword Demon looked at Wang Lu, who was lost in thought, and then gently sighed. What should be said has been said. Now, it's time to part. Chapter 270. When they parted. Wang Lu was slightly surprised by Sword Demon's sudden farewell, but he immediately felt relieved. Wasn't this a matter of course? Just like the problem he had realized before. Sword Demon Zhong Shengming's resurrection had a very clear purpose. First, it was to purify his primordial spirit and cut off the part that had been corroded by the power of hope, ensuring that he died a pure death. Second, it was to fulfill his promise to the Dixian people and find a qualified successor for them. Now that both of these goals had been accomplished, it seemed that there was no meaning in his life anymore. A qualified hero of the valley should die after passing on his power. What Zhong Shengming wanted to do now seemed to be more or less the same. Thinking of this, Wang Lu had a complicated feeling. Along the way, he had fought a battle of wits and courage with this old devil. Naturally, it couldn't be said that they appreciated each other, but it didn't seem to be to the extent of wanting to tear him to pieces. Considering that before the old man died, he left him a legacy that he didn't understand, and considering that when a person is about to die, his words are always kind, Wang Lu was silent for a moment, and then he slowly opened his mouth and sincerely said, "I will miss you. Sword Demon. You're really disgusting. F***CK. Do you know how hard it is for me to let go of our former enmity and say such kind words?" Sword Demon coldly said, "I don't appreciate you, and you don't have a good impression of me. We are enemies, not friends. Why do you have to pretend to let go of our former enmity? If you didn't struggle so hard and obediently let me take over your body, my primordial spirit wouldn't have dissipated. You bastard. Hurry up and die. Don't worry. I have a premonition that we will meet again. I don't want to see you again, you wretch. Is that so? I feel that it won't be long before you start to miss me, although this kind of feeling makes me even more disgusted. TSK, since it's so disgusting, the sooner you die, the sooner you'll be safe." While the two were talking, Sword Demon's figure gradually faded away, becoming more and more transparent. Obviously, the power that kept his primordial spirit condensed had begun to dissipate. Wang Lu didn't want to say another word even though he still had many questions in his mind. He just silently watched the sword devil disappear. This could be regarded as a little bit of respect for this top sword cultivator in the 9 regions. No matter how the two of them fought, it could not be denied that Sword Demon was definitely a worthy opponent. After an unknown amount of time, Sword Devil's silhouette disappeared from his line of sight. Wang Lu let out a disappointed sigh. His heart felt somewhat empty. What's that old saying? Do humans have a deep memory of everyone who has entered their body? Shaking his head, Wang Lu threw this rotten sentence to the back of his mind. He began to pull himself together, tidied up the old mountains and rivers, and operated his cultivation method to repair the various scars caused by the fierce battle just now. Although the world inside his body seemed to be peaceful and the traces of Sword Demon's havoc had disappeared without a trace, but after reconnecting his jade mansion with his body, Wang Lu could clearly feel all kinds of hidden injuries. The original intention of Sword Demon to seize his body was not fake. After he gained control of his body, he immediately carried out a transformation to make this body more suitable for the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword. Now that Sword Demon was no longer there, those transformation and Wang Lu's non-phase method seemed incompatible. Especially the 206 non-phase sword bones that supported the heaven and earth. Most of them were damaged, and many of them were simply thrown aside like garbage. Perhaps this scene could not be healed in a short period of time. However, the advantage of non-phase method was that it was extremely adaptable. Even if it was missing an arm or a leg, it could still maintain its operation. Wang Lu spent some time to make a preliminary adjustment to his body, took a long breath, and began to think about the next problem. It was also a crucial problem. How could he get out? Opening his eyes and looking at the empty space around him, Wang Lu helplessly shrugged his shoulders. According to the 3-dimensional map shown by Sword Demon, this was the lowest level of the ancient sword tomb, completely isolated from the outside world. Unless the conditions were met, the passage would not be opened. But the problem was, the conditions should be met, but what about the passage? Didn't they say that as long as they found the successor, they could leave? Now that the successor was standing here alive and well, where was the passage? Did they mean that only by getting the key could they smoothly leave? Or could it be that when Dixian designed the ancient sword tomb, the passage was designed for Sword Demon? Perhaps in their opinion, after the successor was selected, Sword Demon would come out together with him. So it didn't matter who it was designed for. They probably didn't expect that in 10,000 years, the world had changed into mulberry fields, and too many things had changed. No wonder Sword Demon, before his death, maliciously prophesied that it would not be long before he would miss him. It turned out that he was waiting for him here. Now that Sword Demon was dead, it was impossible for him to come back to life again. If he wanted to go out. Wang Lu once again looked around, and in his heart, there was a little speculation. According to Sword Demon, he was originally going to seize Wang Lu's body, break the seal of Dixian with his own ability, and escape. Then, since Sword Demon could do it, perhaps he could also do it? It would be strange if he could. Because Sword Demon had the primordial spirit of a Mahayana stage cultivator, after seizing the body, he could quickly restore his realm. However, he had not yet passed the tribulation of the King Pill, So even if he cultivated for 10,000 years in this place that was isolated from the main path, it would be impossible. Or, a light flashed in Wang Lu's mind, and his eyes immediately looked down. Next to him, Zhu Shiyao was still unconscious. The sequela of being forcibly seized by the primordial spirit of a Mahayana stage cultivator was still there. Speaking of which, Wang Lu's luck was pretty good. When Sword Demon's primordial spirit tried to seize his body, it was blocked by Wang Lu's indiscriminately destructive move. Even his jade mansion couldn't penetrate, let alone his Zifu. Otherwise, his own Zifu would be a bit looser than Zhu Shiyao's, and he didn't have the ability to be where the light was and where the god was. Well, let's not talk too much. Now to talk about the way to get out, perhaps it would fall on this big sister. Of course, it was not that Zhu Shiyao's stellar sword method was so heaven-defying that she could break the seal of Dixian with her shoot on stage, but if the quality was not enough, the quantity would make up for it. 2 shoot-on stage cultivators, of course, could not be compared with Zhong Shangming, who was at the peak of Mahayana stage, but if there were 1,000 or 10,000 shoot-on stage cultivators, wouldn't that be a lot better? As for where to find 10,000 shoot-on stage cultivators, wasn't that simple? In this endless vast space, wasn't there a man and a woman? As long as he carried forward the spirit of the foolish old man moving the mountain, he believed that the seal of Dixian would not be difficult for them. Thinking of this, Wang Lu looked at his senior sister more and more seriously. Although the few times he spent with senior sister were not pleasant, objectively speaking, Zhu Shiyao was still a rare beauty. Especially when she fainted and retracted that indifferent and sharp gaze, it showed a bit of a woman's gentle temperament. Why not? Just let the goodies flow into the field of others for once. In any case, at this time, he was idle. So Wang Lu simply planned his future children's education strategy. He also took out a pen and paper to record it in detail. When he was writing the Ghost Father chapter, he suddenly heard Zhu Shiyao softly moan. Water, water. Wang Lu suddenly stopped writing. He saw that Zhu Shiyao seemed to be experiencing a nightmare. Her eyebrows were tightly knitted, her face was pale, and her cheeks were covered with beads of sweat. She seemed to be in extreme pain. Water. Although he was not clear about the situation, Zhu Shiyao subconsciously called out repeatedly, so she must be dehydrated. But when Wang Lu heard this, he could not help but be stunned. Eldest senior sister, where do you want me to find water in this barren land? Do you dare to drink the water of the bitter sea? As a professional adventurer, he naturally had sufficient supplies when he went out. His mustard seed bag had always been prepared with water and food, but now he could not open the mustard seed bag. Because Wang Lu had been possessed by the sword demon, his true name on the mustard seed bag was slightly inconsistent, so he could not open it. Of course, this was only a trivial problem that could be solved in a short while. But, water, water. Damn, why are you in such a hurry? Then, Wang Lu thought about it. If he had to find water, it was not that he did not have it. He could not find pure water, but did he not have Boy X? Just as he thought of this, his waist suddenly shook. It turned out that the mustard seed bag had been opened. It was unclear whether he was disappointed or something else. Wang Lu let out a long breath, took out a delicate full water bag from the mustard seed bag, and held it in his hand. Then he looked at Zhu Shiyao, who was moaning on the ground, somewhat at a loss. What should I do next? Feed her water? How? Or when she opened her mouth and moaned, I opened the water bag and poured the water in. Well, although Zhu Shiyao's cherry mouth was a little small, there was an oil seller who could pour oil from copper coins. As an immortal cultivator, am I not as good as an old grandpa? Thinking of this, Wang Lu stood up and began to seriously aim. When he was properly aimed, he opened the stopper. Suddenly, a clear stream of water flowed down, falling exactly on Zhu Shiyao's slightly open mouth. At this time, Zhu Shiyao shook her head in pain. Then, the water splashed on her face, and the droplets flowed down her smooth neck, wetting the front of her clothes. F***CK, I'll kill you. Wang Lu was exasperated, thinking that when the oil seller poured the oil, the gourd on the ground did not disturb him. There was no other way. Since Grand Senior Sister was so uncooperative, Wang Lu could only work a little harder. He bent down and carried her upper body with one arm, his palm supporting her head from behind, and the other hand holding the water bag, slowly feeding her water. However, just as the water entered her throat, Zhu Shiyao began to struggle violently. No, don't. Drown me, don't. F***ck, you were F***king watering, so it wasn't because you lacked water, but because you had a nightmare and were drowned in a flood? Just as Wang Lu felt as if he was struck by lightning, an extremely familiar female voice, with an incomparably complex laughter, resounded in the sky above him. Ward round. Ward round. You two bastards are hugging and whispering sweet nothings here. Are you engaged in an illegal sex trade? Why is Yaoer struggling so much? And her body was soaked in water, exposing her body. F***ck. How dare you, Wang Lu? How dare you rape your grand senior sister in broad daylight? You're going against the heavens. As she spoke, a beautiful white figure descended from the sky. Looking at the petrified Wang Lu, and then at Zhu Shiyao who was still immersed in the nightmare of the flood, the woman snorted coldly, her expression solemn, and said sternly, "Bring me along." Chapter 271. Master. Not knowing how long it took, Wang Lu finally recovered from his shock. He put down his senior sister, who was in his arms, and then forcefully shook his head, still feeling somewhat incredulous. In fact, after experiencing the previous unfolding of divinity, Wang Lu's nerves have long been sharpened to the point of being abnormally thick. Thus, in this ancient sword tomb, no matter what happened, it was not surprising. However, he still didn't expect that he would see his dear master at this time. The woman in white coldly snorted. Nonsense, so wise and powerful, like a god descending to earth. Isn't that your beloved master? Wang Lu sighed. Hearing your shameless opening remarks, I'm relieved. It should not be someone else in disguise. With that, Wang Lu's complexion sank. What's the situation? Regarding the appearance of his master, Wang Lu was extremely shocked. But in fact, he had already expected that the sect elders might come to the rescue. After all, before going deep into the last layer, Lu Li and Little Bai had already evacuated, so they would inevitably report the situation to the sect. Similarly, after the three sects were eliminated, Shengjing sect, 10,000 Art sect, and Kunlun sect would certainly contact their sect elders to inquire about the next step. And after knowing the progress of the matter, the elders of these sects would not be indifferent, especially the elders of Spirit Sword Mountain, who should be very clear about the difficulties that he and Zhu Shiyao encountered. Not only he had the team leader's handbook, he also kept a copy of it in the Heavenly Sword Hall. His senior sister and himself were in an extremely dangerous state. Considering that one of them was the lead disciple and the other was the big sister, they would undoubtedly be the mainstay of the Lingjian school for the next hundreds of thousands of years. Naturally, the sect would not save them. It was one thing to let the disciple experience hardship, but another thing to let the disciple die. For this reason, it would not be surprising if the elders of the Heavenly Sword Hall all came out together. However, Wang Lu didn't expect that the first one to appear would be his master. If he was the only one trapped here, then that would be fine. But, his big sister was also here. Could it be that the sect leader would be indifferent? Therefore, Wang Lu was very suspicious about the situation outside. The situation is very chaotic. Wang Wu said concisely, the four major sects have all been alerted, and the elder group is currently quarreling up there. In a simple sentence he had the time, place and people. The outline of the situation in the outside world was also outlined. The fact that the four major sects were alarmed was undoubtedly bad news, but it was still better than the worst-case scenario. At least the elders of the four major sects were arguing rather than fighting each other. As for why Wang Wu came alone, there seemed to be an explanation. Feng Yin Taoist master and the other elders were obviously wrangling with the other sects, especially the elders of Shengjing sect. His identity was too sensitive, so it was impossible for him to go in alone. No, they are quarreling outside because no one can come in. Wang Wu lightly said, the last layer of the ancient sword tomb has a special restriction, which in addition to the specially selected people, will prevent anyone else from entering. This restriction secretly contains the 4 in 9 divine tribulations. Although it is weak, it's the genuine wrath of the heaven. Unless the elders of the four sects can use a wonderful method to break the restriction, they can only risk their lives to fight against the 4 in 9 divine tribulations. When I came here, they were still arguing about the method to break the restriction. The 10,000 Art sect is fighting against the other 3 sects alone and seems to have the upper hand. Unfortunately, according to their method, it would take at least 3 to 5 months to break the restriction. And then? While asking, Wang Lu incredulously looked at his master. The existence of the 4 in 9 divine tribulations was not strange. When Zhong Shengming was seriously injured, his primordial spirit was likely mixed with the energy of the 4 in 9 divine tribulations, which was then extracted by Dixian and used as a restriction. However, regarding the restriction of Dixian, even the 10,000 art sect was at a loss. So how did his master come in? Was it because her moral integrity was particularly worthless, far below the lowest limit of human beings? Therefore, in the eyes of the ancient sword tomb's identification system, she was simply not a person, but only a dead object such as gravel and dead leaves, so she was specially let in? Then I took the opportunity while they were quarreling and left first. What about the 4 in 9 divine tribulations? Wang Lu knowingly asked because it was really hard to believe. Wang Wu nonchalantly said, "It's not the complete version of the 4 in 9 divine tribulations. Can't I just directly break in?" Directly break in? Wang Wu frowned and asked, "What's so difficult to understand?" "It's like cutting a tangled hemp with a knife. It's like if you pursue a girl, no matter what, you can't get her, so wouldn't it be a matter of course to drug her?" "I think there's a big difference in our values. Come on, you obviously just raped Yao Er. That's just a misunderstanding." "Oh? That's a misunderstanding? Do you think Yao Er will believe me if I tell her about it when she wakes up?" Wang Lu looked down at Grand Senior Sister who was still unconscious. He felt that it would probably be difficult to defeat his master, whose moral integrity was lower than the limit of human beings on this topic, so he could only change the topic. "In other words, you braved the 4 in 9 divine tribulations and risked your life to save me?" When he said that, it seemed that his master's image suddenly became taller. No matter how serious her moral integrity was, it was undeniable that she was, after all, a rare good master. Wang Wu was a little embarrassed. "Oh, it's not as great as you say. It's just an incomplete version of the 4 in 9 divine tribulations. What's the big deal about it? It's not life-threatening at all." His master said it lightly, but Wang Lu couldn't help but be shocked. Just an incomplete version of the 4 in 9 divine tribulations? That was a restriction that even Sword Devil Zhong Shangming didn't have full confidence in breaking, but you came all the way, as if it was nothing? "Master, you're really just AF * King pill, are you kidding me?" Wang Wu didn't want to talk too much about this topic, so she shrugged and asked, "Anyway, what happened here?" Wang Lu didn't have anything to hide from his master, so he told her the whole story in detail. Regarding the fierce battle between Wang Lu and Sword Devil, although his master didn't say it out loud, she slightly nodded and showed a look of approval. But when she heard about Dixian, her expression changed. "Tisk, 10 million tombs? That's really a big deal." To Wang Lu's surprise, when he heard about Dixian's inheritance, his master didn't show an insatiable expression, but instead showed a look of disgust. She didn't care about the 10 million immortal treasures at all. Wang Lu naturally wouldn't miss this detail. He guessed that his master probably knew about the existence of Dixian, and it was very likely that they had dealt with each other. However, since they hadn't mentioned this topic for 10 years, it was obvious that his master didn't intend to talk about it. "So, as the legitimate successor, what are you going to do?" His master shook her head and asked. Wang Lu said, "I haven't thought about it yet, but I can't swallow it all by myself." Wang Wu smiled. "Yes, this is not an inheritance for 1 or 2 people to monopolize. 10 million immortal treasures were not like sleeping beauties that just lay there waiting to be plucked, but treasures that needed great effort to get. If every instance was as difficult as the ancient sword tomb, Wang Lu didn't think that he would have the patience to break through the 10 million levels. Moreover, things like immortal treasures were not always good. Generally speaking, it was enough for a cultivator to have at most 2 or 3 personal magical treasures. Any more would just be a burden. Of course, the 9 regions was big, and there were indeed some local tyrant cultivators with countless magical treasures. However, in actual combat, they were not necessarily much stronger than ordinary cultivators. Therefore, there was once a wise cultivator who joked that magical treasures for cultivators were like Taoist companions. Opening a harem and having tens of thousands of Taoist companions sounded very good and powerful, but in fact, it would only make people lose their minds. Therefore, Wang Lu didn't intend to monopolize the 10 million immortal treasures left by Dixian, because there was a better way to make use of it than monopolizing it. "Before that sword demon died, he left me something really precious. Wang Lu said, and then stretched out his hand to project an image that was imprinted in his primordial spirit. It was a huge, bright like a galaxy network, and at the same time, it was also a three-dimensional map of the 10 million Dixian tomb. This is the real priceless inheritance. The 10 million immortal treasures are just empty, but if this map is sold at a high price to Shangjing sect, that kind of spendthrift, the benefits are real. Wang Wu said, yes, it would be a waste if I don't rip off that group of local tyrants. However, there is a premise, and that is to find the legendary key. Wang Lu nodded. Master, do you have any clues? I want to. Wang Wu helplessly said, according to what you said, that key is at least an immortal treasure. If I had a clue, I would have snatched it and sold it for money. After a pause, Wang Wu said, but, although I don't have a clue, I know someone who definitely has it. But, let's talk about this when we get back to the mountain. Right now, sect leader and the others must be anxiously waiting. With that, Wang Wu pulled her disciple's hand, hugged Zhu Shiyao at her side, and then soared into the sky, flying toward the dark sky. Lightning flashed in the sky, and the black fog tumbled. The closer they got, the more intimidating Wang Lu felt, which made it difficult for him to breathe. That was the power of the 4 in 9 divine tribulations. Although it was just a remnant of the real divine tribulation extracted from the primordial spirit of Sword Demon by the Dixian, it was still the wrath of the heaven, which was not something that a mortal could challenge. Wang Lu's non-phase method was actually quite profound. Even Sword Demon inadvertently fell into his trap. However, at this time, in the face of the 4 in 9 divine tribulations, Wang Lu felt a deep sense of powerlessness and fear. Then, an invisible and transparent shield wrapped around him, and the depression in his heart suddenly disappeared. Wang Lu smiled, knowing that his master had propped up her non-phase sword defense. In fact, she brought Wang Lu and Zhu Shiyao up. Wasn't it to show her invincible power to resist the divine tribulation? Previously, when Wang Lu talked about how Sword Demon taught him the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword, his master just smiled without saying a word. She didn't refute Zhong Shengming's disparaging remarks about non-phase method. However, Wang Lu was very clear that it was not that his master didn't care about it. Although she was not narrow-minded, to say that she was broad-minded, it was only limited to the physical level. Spiritually, she was definitely not a generous person. She didn't care about it because Zhong Shengming was not present, so what was the point of arguing? But she could speak with facts. You think non-phase method is not good enough? Then I'll let you see the real fierceness of non-phase method. Seeing that the blue dome of the sky was approaching and the 4 in 9 divine tribulations was just around the corner, Wang Lu took a deep breath and suppressed the instinctive uneasiness in his heart. Next, it was time to witness a miracle. The next moment, the emerald green sword light went straight through the sky. The black clouds that filled the sky were wrapped in lightning, but they were firmly isolated by the sword light, unable to enter even half a step. The 4 in 9 divine tribulations contained the infinite changes of the heavenly Tao. Wang Lu only felt that his whole body was sometimes shining, sometimes dim. Countless mysterious changes bloomed and extinguished in front of his eyes. For a moment, he felt dizzy. However, no matter how many changes the heavenly tribulation launched, no matter how many rounds of attacks it launched, under the emerald green sword light, all of them vanished into thin air. His master carried a person in each of her hands and only used her primordial spirit to control the sword, yet the sword defense was flawless. Even the 4 in 9 divine tribulations could not shake it. A moment later, the clouds broke through the sky. Looking at the long-lost light in front of him, Wang Lu couldn't help but sigh with emotion. Master, you're really awesome. Chapter 272. Wang Lu followed his master to break through the 4 in 9 divine tribulations, saw the long-lost light, and also saw the long-lost elders of the sect. A familiar face with an incomparably surprised look appeared in mid-air. Obviously, no one expected that the master and disciple of the non-phase peak would appear at this time. Similarly, Wang Lu also didn't expect to see so many people. The arrival of the elders was not surprising, but what was surprising was that several Heavenly Sword Hall elders who usually appeared were actually there, including the sect leader. Lu Xian, Feng He, Lu Li, Hua Yun, and even Ao Guanhai were all present. The Heavenly Sword Hall's entire family had moved, and the lineup was luxurious, completely contrary to common sense. Who would send out all the elders of the sect just to do something? Now that all the cultivators who could fight on the Spirit Sword Mountain had come out, What should they do when the Spirit Sword Mountain was empty? Even though Lingjian School was one of the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League, had a transcendent status, and had no natural enemy in the Blue River region, but this kind of behavior, no matter how one looked at it, was like the demeanor of a crazy girl? Of course, to say that Spirit Sword Mountain was defenseless was not necessarily true. Although all the cultivators who could fight had come out, there were still a few ordinary people who could fight. Whether it was the red-eyed poor lady boss at the foot of the mountain, or the chef who spent all his skill points on swordsmanship, all of them were enough to suppress the scene. However, this time, the Heavenly Sword Hall was still enough to show the importance that Lingjian School attached to Wang Lu and Zhu Shiyao, which was difficult for any other sect to match. Wang Lu didn't say it out loud, but inwardly, he was moved. The number of people in Lingjian School had withered, but the cohesiveness of the sect was really indescribable. When he saw the elders of Spirit Sword Sect, Wang Lu also saw the elders of the other 3 sections. The situation was indeed like what his master said. At present, 10,000 Arts Sect was using their mouth to fight the other 3 sections. After all, no one could match 10,000 Arts Sect in the research of restriction breaking. However, on the other hand, Shengjing Sect, 10,000 Arts Sect, and Kunlun Sect had secretly joined hands to contend against Spirit Sword Sect. Although the 3 sects were still in dispute, the several elders of Lingjian School were actually together, leaving the several people of Lingjian School out. The reason was very simple. The Heavenly Sword Hall had turned out in full force, which gave the Spirit Sword Sect an overwhelming advantage in force. Although the most powerful elders of Lingjian School was Yuanying Stage had come out 7 people, it was equivalent to the other 2 sects. The other 2 sects had an overwhelming advantage. Thus, the Lingjian School had formed a loose alliance. The symbol of the Spirit Sword Sect's most powerful force, the Heavenly Sword Hall, suddenly sent 7 people, which was almost equivalent to the sum of the elders of the other 2 sections. Thus, in order to balance the 3 sects, a loose alliance was formed. 10 sect sword 10 sect disciples from the other 3 sects were sect. When Wang Lu eliminated everyone else and entered the deepest level of the sword tomb with Zhu Shiyao, the competition between the disciples had already ended. No matter how dissatisfied the 3 sects were, they could only concede defeat. However, when Wang Lu and Zhu Shiyao were trapped in the sword tomb, the elders of Lingjian School directly broke the outer layer of the sword tomb, which was used to isolate the seal above the king pill. This was tantamount to breaking the previous tacit understanding of not dispatching elder-level cultivators. Thus, a new competition began. The original result was invalid, and everyone had to rely on their own means. At present, the elders of the several sects were trying their best to get a bigger share of this sword tomb treasure house. Previously, when they swept the first few layers, each of them had a good harvest. Only the Lingjian School was indifferent to the treasures along the way. Obviously, all of their attention was on the last layer. And everyone knew that the most precious treasure of this sword tomb was hidden in the deepest part. The previous harvest was just an appetizer. The real feast would be left for later. Of course, this delicious meal would undoubtedly be a long wait. According to the calculation of 10,000 Arts Sect, even if the 4 sects joined forces, it would still be difficult to break this immortal level restriction in a few months. During this period, there were too many changes that could happen, so they must be particularly careful. Just as the elders of the several sects raised their vigilance and prepared to fight a protracted battle, suddenly, a violent shock came from under their feet. A tingling and paralyzing aura spread out. At the same time, the 10,000 Arts Sect elder, who was carefully measuring the restriction on the bottom layer, exclaimed, "The power of the divine tribulation has begun to boil." To the elders present, this extremely weak 49 heavenly tribulation might not be able to take their lives if it continued to spread. However, none of them wanted to be struck half dead by the tribulation lightning for no reason. Hearing that the heavenly tribulation was showing signs of going out of control, everyone flew into the air and cast defensive spells to ensure that everything was fine. In the next moment, these elders who were on high alert saw the master and disciple breaking out of the ground. A certain unconscious senior sister was taken as luggage. As a result, under the great psychological shock, they were all dumbfounded, completely at a loss of what to do. If they were sneak attacked at this time, more than half of these elders would suffer a loss. Fortunately, after all, their cultivation base was extraordinary, so they quickly recovered their senses. "How could it be you guys?" The leading elder of Shengjing Sect, Supreme Tian Yu, tightly frowned. At the same time, his palm has been placed on his personal spiritual treasure, the hilt of the Heavenly Moon Monster Blade. As the supreme with the highest cultivation base among them, he had long been dissatisfied with the strength of the Lingjian school. Because whether it was within the Shangjing sect or on behalf of the elders to deal with external affairs, Supreme Tianyu had always been strong to the end. When had he ever bowed his head to outsiders? And when he was poached by Shangjing sect as a monster cultivator to be an elder, it was also because of his strong and aggressive way of doing things. In this trip, he was in a hurry, so he didn't have time to bring along his assistants who had a tacit understanding with him. The 3 Shangjing sect elders that followed him had the title of elder, but they were all wine bags and rice bags. On the way here, he had a conflict with the sect leader of Lingjian school. Devil blade against spiritual sword, he obviously had an overwhelming advantage in terms of realm, but he did not gain the upper hand. In addition, there were many people in Lingjian school, so he had no choice but to be vigilant and restrain himself. However, Supreme Tianyu did not give up. If he could seize the opportunity, he did not mind turning against the Lingjian school. In any case, he was just an elder of Shangjing sect, unlike Feng Yin who was the sect head and had no freedom to do things. And Supreme Tianyu was one of the Shangjing sect's elders who did the dirty work. As long as there was a suitable opportunity, he could exaggerate things. And now, it seemed like the opportunity to do things had come to him. Previously, the 4 sects were blocked by Dixian's restriction, and no one could break through it. Later on, under the initiative of the 10,000 Art sect, the several sects made an agreement to first break the restriction and rescue the people. As for the true immortal's inheritance hidden in the deepest part, it would be distributed according to how much effort each sect put into breaking the restriction. During the cooperation period, the 4 sects would exchange their respective technology, and they must not conceal it maliciously. Especially when there was a breakthrough in the restriction-breaking technology, they could not hide it from the other 3 sections. Because this was the basis of the cooperation. Among the 4 sects, it was difficult for any one of them to break the restriction by themselves. This required the exchange of technology, and in the process of exchange anything could happen. For example, Lingjian school was slightly weak in pure technical theory, but it was likely that through the exchange of technology from the other 3 sects, they would be inspired and find the correct method to break the restriction first. This was very likely to happen. If there was no restriction, no one would feel at ease to exchange technology, and the cooperation would no longer exist. However, right now, there was still no breakthrough in the technical problem, but someone from Lingjian school had already gone deep into the lower level and brought back their disciple. What did this mean? It meant that this group of smelly and shameless country bumpkins of Blue River Valley had finally begun to court death. If not for this, it would be really difficult for him to find an opportunity to make his move. After all, without the help of the other sects, it was impossible for him to deal with so many people from Heavenly Sword Hall. However, the sudden change in Lingjian school gave everyone a reasonable reason to sanction them. As long as they could defeat Lingjian school first, among the remaining 3 sects, Shangjing sect would be the strongest. However, just as Supreme Tianyu was about to make his move, the 10,000 Art sect elder incredulously asked, "How did you guys do it? The restriction obviously hasn't been broken yet." Unlike Supreme Tianyu, who wholeheartedly wanted to fish in troubled waters, the 10,000 Art sect elder was more concerned about the technology than the true immortal's inheritance at the bottom of the sword tomb. In his view, since the restriction hadn't been broken, it meant that the people of Spirit Sword sect didn't tear up the agreement. At most, they just touched the edge of the agreement. However, compared to the spirit of the agreement, he was more concerned about how Wang Wu could freely come and go. Therefore, when he opened his mouth, he talked about the technology and never mentioned the previous agreement. Supreme Tianyu immediately inwardly cursed this group of technical nerds for ruining things. He was not blind. How could he not see the problem in the way Wang Wu broke through the restriction? Although he didn't believe that a king pill could withstand the 4 in 9 divine tribulations, he also knew that the people of Lingjian school would not be stupid enough to dig their own grave by tearing up the agreement. There must be a reason for this. However, he didn't intend to reason with the people of Lingjian school. He only needed an excuse to make his move. What's there to say to this group of treacherous, despicable people? Supreme Tianyu roared and threw out the monster knife in his hand. The knife flickered, which contained the magical ability of his unity stage. Vaguely, there was a heavenly tribulation-like oppressive power. Even though Wang Wu was known as the #1 king pill in 9 regions, above the king pill was the Yuanying stage, above the Yuanying stage was the deity stage, and above the deity stage was the unity stage. Even if there were 100 king pills, they would still be broken by the full power strike of a unity stage cultivator. At that time, even if someone didn't want to fight, it would be impossible. Therefore, Tian Yu's attack was particularly fast, giving no time for people to react. And ever since Supreme Tian Yu mastered his method, his monster knife had never missed its target. Clang! Just as Tian Yu roared and inwardly guessed that Wang Wu would be seriously injured, he heard the sound of metal clashing, and his original monster blade was bounced back by a tremendous force. The next moment, he saw Feng Yin Taoist master reach out his hand to recall his flying sword with a cold face. No matter how fast Tian Yu's monster knife was, it couldn't be caught by the stellar divine eyes. Before Tian Yu could make his move, Feng Yin had already intercepted his sneak attack. However, after this sword strike, Feng Yin was somewhat embarrassed. If he counterattacked, it would be exactly what he wanted, but if he stopped the fight, Tian Yu would not give up so easily. While he was hesitating, sure enough, he saw Tian Yu reveal a grin and his monster knife was about to attack again. However, at this time, an unexpected change interrupted Tian Yu. Wang Lu, you still have the nerve to come out. On the Shengjing sect's side, when a certain disciple saw Wang Lu, his eyes were exceptionally red. Ignoring the fact that the elders were present, the disciples needed to be careful with their words and actions. The anger in his mind surged up and he roared. With this interruption, Tian Yu's monster knife could no longer be swung down. The topic shifted to Wang Lu. As a great elder, he couldn't bully a small disciple, right? Tian Yu fiercely glared at that disciple, but then he saw that the one who spoke was an elite inner court disciple, Wang Yuelwanyu. When Wang Yuelwanyu saw Wang Lu, her face was full of anger and she gnashed her teeth. Seeing this familiar woman's face, Wang Lu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Ever since this woman suffered a loss from him, it was simply unforgettable. It was as if she gave birth to his child. I don't remember looking for such a stupid woman. However, the next moment, he saw Wang Yuelwanyu restrain her anger and instead, a malicious smile appeared on her face. Wang Lu. Have you ever heard of a person called Stellar Fairy Wang Lulu? As soon as this remark came out, the sound of water spraying suddenly resounded in the square. Stellar Fairy, that was probably someone's dark history that would be difficult to wash away in his lifetime. Hearing this, many people immediately became spirited, ready to see how Wang Lu would explain it. No matter how much Wang Lu despised moral integrity, under the watchful eyes of the public, he either denied it or admitted that he had done something shameful, but in the end, he fell into a predicament. However, this was called bringing evil upon oneself. At that time, if he didn't use Stellar Fairy to clear the square, how could this happen? Under the malicious eyes of the crowd, Wang Lu calmly became the focus and then smiled. Stellar Fairy Wang Lulu? That's my master. With that, he pointed his finger at his master, who was watching the show. In the dead silence, Wang Lu eloquently argued. As we all know, Lingzhen School's care and love for its disciples is second to none in the Wanxian League. This time, the exploration of the ancient sword tomb is full of thorns. How could the school let us explore on our own? Therefore, before I left, my master created an avatar to follow me and protect me. Because of the restriction here, no one above the king pill is allowed to enter. Therefore, this avatar does not have too much magical power and is only used to give strategic guidance when needed. In fact, the reason why I was able to crush all of you in terms of IQ is because of my master's guidance. As for Stellar Fairy Wang Lulu, of course, it was also because of my beautiful and enchanting master. Otherwise, do you think I am the one who has a fetish for cross-dressing? Of course, some people may ask, can king pill cultivators also create an avatar? This question, I think after careful consideration, will be answered. Don't forget, my master is a rare double king pill cultivator, so creating an avatar is very easy. If you don't believe me, you can also cultivate the second king pill and see if you can also create an avatar. Finally, for those who insist that Stellar Fairy is related to me, such as junior sister Wang Yue, I want to say, I wish you better go further and further on the road of Fujoshi. Chapter 273. In the depths of the ancient sword tomb, Wang Lu's confident voice resounded in all directions. Facing the gaze of many Yuanying, deity, and even unity stage supremes, he was not in a hurry and just kept on talking. However, not everyone was as comfortable as Wang Lu. Enough! Tian Yu roared, interrupting Wang Lu's speech. Seeing that Wang Lu's speech was about to win the applause of the audience, although many people knew that what he said was pure nonsense, it was so wonderful that they really felt apologetic if they didn't applaud. Tianyu knew that if he didn't stop it, the topic would be diverted by him, and he would no longer have the opportunity to fish in troubled waters. We are not interested in whether you have a cross-dressing fetish or not. Let's talk about your harvest down there first. Tianyu went straight to the point and simply revealed the face of a bandit. In any case, he was notorious in the Wanxian League, so at this time, he was the most suitable to play the villain. If the people of Kunlun's sect and 10,000 Arts sect were not willing to pick, then he would pick. In any case, what he said was also what everyone thought, so he was not worried that it would not be echoed. If Kunlun's sect and 10,000 Arts sect did not want to get the inheritance of the true immortal down there, why would they come all the way to help the people of Lingjian School? Were they that humanitarian? In fact, everyone was not interested in how Wang Wu broke through the restriction. Of course, except for the people of 10,000 Arts sect, they only cared about one question, which was, how would these changes affect the distribution of the true immortal's inheritance? Sure enough, although many people frowned, no one opposed it. Their eyes were still focused on Wang Lu, but they were not concerned about the stellar fairy, but about his harvest in the lower level. It stood to reason that no matter how much harvest Wang Lu had in the lower level, it seemed that it had nothing to do with the other sections. However, the things in this world often didn't have that much reason to talk about. What's more, when the Lingjian school judged that Wang Lu and Zhu Shiyao could not escape by themselves and sent the elders of the Heavenly Sword Hall to save them, it meant that they had given up the original results of the battle and had to fight for the distribution of the inheritance again. Of course, in this process, Lingjian school's share would definitely be more than the other sects, but it would be impossible for them to monopolize it. Moreover, looking at Tianyu Supreme's actions, it was obvious that he wanted a large share of the pie. However, this was also a long-standing rule of the Wanxian League. Although the people from Lingjian School were unhappy about this, they wouldn't go so far as to completely ignore the rules of the Wanxian League. The next step would be to argue with the other three sects and divide the benefits. However, no one present would have thought that the inheritance in the deepest part of the world would exceed everyone's expectations. You want to see the rewards? Wang Lu nodded. He stretched out his hand and projected an image from his primordial spirit, showing it to everyone. Look, this is it. What they saw in front of them was a galaxy-like bright network. Tens of thousands of nodes were connected by a thin line, slowly moving, and the trajectory seemed to have an elusive rule. Wang Lu's generous display was quite unexpected. Even the several elders of Lingjian School cast a surprised look. Although this lead disciple of Spirit Sword sect was not stingy, according to his character, he would never be so easy to deal with. Especially when Supreme Tianyu put on a rude and unreasonable face, it was easy to make Wang Lu unyielding. However, although he generously displayed such a network, what was its specific use? Was this the legendary true immortal level inheritance? This is a map. Wang Lu explained. A treasure map that leads to the deeper part. Look, this is where we are. Along with the change of Wang Lu's intention, the network was rapidly enlarged, but the focus was focused on one point. This point is the ancient sword tomb that we are at. In fact, this is not a sword tomb, but for the time being, let's call it that. Wang Lu said and found that the faces of the elders of the several sects had changed. It was very simple. If such a magnificent tomb could only play the role of a point on the star map, then wouldn't those tens of thousands of light points be tens of thousands of immortal treasures? Everyone could think of this, and similarly, everyone could also think of the contradiction. If Wang Lu took out 2 or 3 immortal treasures, or even 20 or 30 immortal treasures, everyone would be surprised and would choose to believe it. However, tens of thousands of immortal treasures were too outrageous. Are you playing with us? Supreme Tianyu coldly said. After all, he still didn't give up on solving the problem by force. The monster blade in his hand was simply unbearable. Wang Lu responded, whether I'm playing with you or not, everyone can see it. With that, he continued to enlarge the star map, infinitely expanding the point that represented the sword tomb into a 3-dimensional map with a radius of several dozens of feet. This is the panoramic map of the sword tomb, which records every detail. Everyone can compare it with what you have seen and heard to see if it matches. After several elders carefully identified it, they all nodded. Tianyu sneered and said, "Your master used some unknown method to sneak in without us knowing, so naturally, he will tell you what he saw along the way. Now that it's confirmed, What's so strange about it? What can it prove? Supreme Tianyu, you're wrong. An elder of 10,000 art sect said, there are clearly many places in this map that we have never discovered before. If it's confirmed, it can indeed explain the origin of this map. Tianyu glared at that elder. Our 4 sects arrived one after another, and Lingjian school was the first. Moreover, along the way, can you ensure that every action of every person in Lingjian school is under your control? What's so strange about them unearthing some secrets of the sword tomb when people are not paying attention? Not to mention that even if this map is correct, it doesn't mean that other parts are also correct. Tens of thousands of immortal treasures, yet he dares to indulge in fantasy. This statement somewhat had the flavor of sophistry, which immediately made the 10,000 art sect elders wrinkle their brows, ready to argue with the Supreme of Unity stage. However, how could Supreme Tianyu be interested in arguing with people? Although he was used to sophistry, he was not a reckless and ignorant fool. Otherwise, the Shengjing sect would have long suppressed this troublemaking monster cultivator for thousands of years. He certainly knew that the authenticity of Wang Lu's map was very high, but he insisted on using this as a breakthrough, which made him overbearing. Actually, he wanted Wang Lu to come up with more information to prove it. If you said the map is real, then there must be evidence, right? And this evidence was the key. Since Wang Lu was willing to calmly take out the map, naturally, he had something more important than the map in his hand. And what Tianyu wanted was precisely that more important thing. Otherwise, if Wang Lu threw him a bone, wouldn't Tianyu be grateful and run to gnaw it? Greed was insatiable and insatiable. When given an inch, one would want a foot. Although these 2 qualities have been criticized for a long time, as a demon cultivator born in an environment of natural selection, these 2 qualities played a great role in Supreme Tianyu's achievements today. If you can put tens of thousands of immortal treasures in front of us, even if your Lingjian school takes 99% of them, while the rest of us divide a few, I have no objection. Supreme Tianyu's eyes flickered. But it's not that easy to fool us with a treasure map that is hard to distinguish. At this time, a long-bearded elder representing Kunlun sect slowly said, Lingjian school's fellow Taoists, if you have more harvest, you might as well say it. We're not robbers, we won't be unreasonable to snatch your spoils, but at least we should know how many things there are in total. This is the general rule of the Wanxian League. Wang Wu sneered, rules? Lingjian school is a supersect of the Wanxian League. Don't you feel weak to use the Wanxian League's rules to oppress us? What's more, I won't abide by the rules today. What can you do? Economic sanctions, or send troops to suppress me? After a pause, the woman's face became more gloomy and cold. A group of shameless things. If you have the ability, come to me directly. I want to see how much ability you, a group of weak chickens, have. How can you compare with the 49 heavenly tribulations? His words were even more rude and unreasonable than what Supreme Tianyu had said. They were so domineering that the expressions of many people changed. Was this the declaration of the Spirit Sword sect to shed all pretense of cordiality? What did they take down there that made them so fearless? What was going on with the treasure map of the 10 million immortal treasures? However, people were more concerned about Feng Yin's reaction. No matter how harsh Wang Wu's words were, she couldn't represent Lingjian school after all. Moreover, everyone knew that this woman was unreliable. Unexpectedly, Feng Yin sighed and turned to Wang Lu. I'm afraid the reason for this is not as simple as some people think. 10 million immortal treasures. Even if the earth veins of the continent dried up, it still can't afford it. What exactly is going on? Wang Lu, you can say it. Wang Lu smiled. My experience in the lower levels is complicated and bizarre, and this inheritance of 10 million immortal treasures also has complicated twists and turns. It's like this. Then, Wang Lu tirelessly talked about the principle of these 10 million immortal treasures. Of course, questions about the existence of Sword Devil Zhong Shangming, Primal Chaos Heaven Splitting Sword and Dixian were naturally avoided. However, the principle of the 10 million tombs alone was enough to attract everyone's attention. The brilliance of Dixian's method was completely beyond imagination, distorting the Tao of heaven and earth to create an inexhaustible and ever-changing treasure vault. If they didn't see this with their own eyes, it would really be hard to believe. However, at this time, if it wasn't without a doubt, who could make up such a vivid story? In the long silence and shock, someone soon realized the next problem. If what Wang Lu said was true, that these 10 million immortal treasures could only be obtained by continuously going deep into the tombs and experiencing tests, then there was actually no possibility for Lingjian school to monopolize this inheritance, and there was no need for it. Even if the 10 million tombs were included in their territory, how many could Lingjian school excavate? Lingjian school was famous for its sparse population, and there were so many treasures on this star map that even if Lingjian school was given hundreds or thousands of years, they still wouldn't be able to excavate all of them. Since there was no need to monopolize it, then, thinking of this, many of the elders' expressions changed again, but not because of surprise, but because of embarrassment. If they couldn't monopolize it, of course they had to share it. These 10 million immortal treasures were obviously something that Lingjian school had already decided to share with the other sections. In the end, before the other party finished talking, they couldn't wait to snatch it. It was no wonder that Wang Wu was so angry. This kind of feeling was probably, Wang Lu said coldly, the feeling of being masked and raped by the bridegroom the day before the wedding. Wang Wu clicked her tongue. Your analogy is really deep to the bone. Humph, as a man, how can I not go deep? At this time, even Supreme Tian Yu was stunned speechless. His hand on the demon knife opened and closed a few times, but in the end, he let go. Although he was rude and unreasonable, he wasn't without a plan. At this point, how could he find an excuse to start a war? He could only remain silent. After a moment, the long-bearded elder of Kunlun's sect opened his mouth to smooth things over. I think, there were indeed many misunderstandings before, but the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League are of the same breath and branch. There is no misunderstanding that can't be solved. Wang Lu sneered. Tisk tiske, the lubricant boy who delivered the lubricant after the event is here. Wang Wu sneered. Tisk tiske, you think that just because you lubricated it doesn't count as rape? Wang Lu sneered. Tisk tiske, that door has been destroyed. Happiness can never come back. Wang Wu wanted to continue to sneer, but was helplessly interrupted by Feng Yin. Enough, you two. Chapter 274. In the end, the 4 sects didn't really shed all pretense of cordiality. Although the non-phase master and disciple's cynical ridicule made the other 3 sects' elders completely embarrassed, at least they managed to maintain the situation at the level of verbal bombardment rather than a more tragic level. Lingjian school didn't have the intention to shed all pretense of cordiality, because the next thing to do was a big thing, which needed the support of the other sects, especially Shengjing sect. Just like everyone had realized, this huge treasure trove was not something that could be monopolized by any one sect, and it was even not something that could be monopolized by the 4 sects that were present. According to the star chart, there were thousands upon thousands of immortal treasures. And in theory, since this place was formed by Dixian's reversal of the world's main path, the immortal treasures were, in fact, inexhaustible. The so-called thousands upon thousands was not the total number of immortal treasures, but the number that could be mined at the same time. In other words, if there were thousands upon thousands of elite adventurers comparable to Wang Lu, it was possible to mine thousands upon thousands of immortal treasures at once. Of course, even if they searched the entire Wanxian League, how many people like Wang Lu could they find? This kind of immortal abode was absolutely not something that could be monopolized by any one sect. Moreover, there was not much meaning in monopolizing it. The benefits that you could get would not increase. Instead, it would cause the world's cultivators to lose a great opportunity. This was completely harming others without benefiting oneself. Once the news was leaked, it would instead provoke the world's resentment. Therefore, the solution to this matter was to share it. Not only with the 3 sects of Shengjing sect, Kunlun sect, but also with the more than 1,300 sects of the Wanxian League, Xueqi sect. Lingjian school intended to announce this news to the world. Of course, this was not out of any eagerness for justice, but to seek a greater benefit. As long as one put in effort, it was possible to obtain immortal treasures in an immortal level tomb, which was tantamount to immortal abode, enough to make the world's people scramble like ducks. And once the world's people scramble like ducks, an excellent opportunity to get rich would follow. Throughout the ages, the richest person had always been the one who distributed the wealth, not the one who created it. Instead of risking one's life and diligently digging in the millions of tombs, it was better to directly summon all the cultivators in the world to enter the tombs and dig out the treasures. Then they would take a cut from it and enjoy the fruits of others' labor. The percentage of the cut wouldn't be too much. As long as they took 10% of the harvest, it would accumulate into an abnormally rich harvest. Of course, there had to be an explanation for this 10% cut. Otherwise, it would be considered robbery. Perhaps everyone could accept it in the beginning, but not long after, they would question why they would want a share of the treasures that they had worked so hard and risked their lives to obtain. However, this problem was not difficult to solve. The star map that Wang Lu projected was the best reason. We have a map. Do you want it? If you don't want it, you have to promise me 1/10 of the profits. Sk, your courage is commendable. In this dangerous place where you can die at any time, one more piece of information means one more chance of survival. Are you sure you don't want it? As for the act of buying a copy of the map and casually spreading it, first of all, it was against the harmony of heaven. Reading it was one thing, but spreading a pirated copy could easily lead to a divine tribulation, so usually, no one dared to try it. Secondly, the structure of Dixian's tomb was not fixed. In addition to the initial ancient sword tomb, the rest of the tombs had to be built according to the situation of these cultivators. The test checkpoints, guardian monsters, and the final reward were all randomly generated. Thus, the content of the map was naturally not fixed. In essence, it was more like a set of exquisite calculations. As long as the situation of the cultivators who entered the tomb was inserted into the map, one could roughly speculate the situation that might be encountered in the tomb. The tens of millions of tombs that Dixian built had tens of millions of different calculations. Wang Lu only sold one map at a time, so simple duplication was meaningless. However, these were only technical issues. To truly unify the resources of the 9 regions' immortal cultivation world and establish such a tax mechanism, relying on one sect alone was absolutely not enough. Especially with the sparse population of Lingjian School, it was even more powerless. Therefore, it must pull in Shangjing's sect, the leader of the immortal cultivation world. Of course, Kunlun Immortal Sect and 10,000 Arts Sect, the 2 sects of the 5 uniques, couldn't be left behind. Otherwise, in practice, if these 2 giants kept hindering them, they wouldn't be able to play. Of course, the above was just the basic idea. To really establish such a set of game rules, it needed a lot of work. In short, let's set up a special committee first. During the silence, the one with the highest status, Feng Yin, opened his mouth. With our 4 sects as the leader, along with Royal Soldier Sect, Myriad Appearance Sect, and other top-rank sects, we will jointly form a special committee to deal with all matters in this underground immortal tomb. The committee will not be under the jurisdiction of any organization and will operate independently. The number of members will be no more than 50. There will be 5 standing committee seats, as well as a chairman. The term of office and election method are to be determined. However, the first chairman will be me, and later on, it will be rotated. When these words came out, the elders of the other 3 sects looked at each other in dismay. They were not in a hurry to answer. For this kind of strategic matter, they couldn't make a decision on behalf of their sections. Thus, they had to use their own magical ability and immediately contact their respective sect leaders. A moment later, the leaders of the other sects sent back a message. They had no objection to Feng Yin Taoist Master's proposal. After all, Feng Yin Taoist Master's proposal was generally fair. Although directly taking the position of the first chairman seemed a bit tyrannical, after all, the core part of the whole set of game rules was owned by Lingjian School. Thus, it was natural for them to have more benefits. It was believed that in the future, among the 50 committee members, although Lingjian School had the least number of people, the proportion of the committee members would not be lower than any other sect. Of course, the specific establishment of the committee still needed to be discussed separately. However, this idea has been approved by 4 of the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League, so it was basically passed. The next question was, what about the key? No matter how excited everyone was to think about the future, the premise of all this was that everyone at least had to be able to enter the tomb. Now that the key to open the door was unfortunately lost, if they couldn't find it, no matter what they said, it would be useless. This was also the main reason why Lingjian School wanted to unite all the sections. After more than 10,000 years, to find an unknown key was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Even Feng Yin Taoist Master's star diffraction technique couldn't find any clues. Thus, they could only widely mobilize the masses and cast a net to catch it. According to Sword Demon, the key itself was an immortal treasure. It shouldn't be an ordinary item on the continent. Moreover, its magical power was related to the creation of heaven and earth, so it was very likely to be a space-time immortal treasure. But even so, only a few sects could unite and mobilize all the immortals in the world to have a hope of finding the key in a short period of time. Similarly, The search for the key was also a matter of competition and cooperation. It was true that everyone worked together, but the party who obtained the key in the end would undoubtedly have a larger share in the committee. And this was also one of the reasons why Feng Yin Daoist master didn't ask for too much of the committee's authority. If Lingjian school had already obtained the key at this time, how could they be satisfied with a limited term of office as the chairman of the committee? It was reasonable to have at least 3 out of 5 standing committee members. However, since they didn't have the key, they would have to wait until they found the key. Of course, everyone knew that in the process of looking for the key, Lingjian school certainly had a certain advantage in clues, but the advantage was not obvious. Otherwise, wouldn't it be better for them to conceal the information about the key? After the important matter was settled, the people of the 4 sects went their separate ways and arranged their disciples to look for a needle in a haystack. The Lingjian school also cleaned up the mess, and the elders led their disciples back to the mountain to recuperate. In this experiential learning in the ancient sword tomb, Lingjian school was undoubtedly the biggest winner. In addition to the untapped Dixian inheritance, the several successor disciples also obtained great benefits. Needless to say, Wang Lu and Zhu Shiyao, although their injuries were not light, after their injuries were healed, their cultivation base could advance by leaps and bounds. Lu Li, on the other hand, obtained a suitable high-rank spiritual treasure flying sword. Her harvest was no less than that of Wang Lu and Zhu Shiyao. Although there were many flying swords in her hands, their level was actually not high, they were just magical treasures. Because spiritual treasure usually had its own spirituality. However, Lu Li's brilliant sword heart had extremely harsh requirements for the characteristics of the flying sword, which very few spiritual treasures could meet. Although Lingjian's school searched in every possible way, they never found a suitable one. Therefore, they simply replaced it with a lower-level magical treasure. However, this time, Lu Li was self-reliant. After Wang Lu went deep into the last level, she was bored, so she casually wandered around the ancient sword tomb. If Wang Lu was still here, he would certainly scold her for courting death. However, perhaps her luck was really deep. In a remote stone room, she actually found a broken sword that seemed to have been abandoned for a long time. When she picked up the sword actually bloomed with dazzling brilliance, revealing the nature of a high-rank spiritual treasure, which was highly compatible with Lu Li. Later, after being identified by the sect elders, it was discovered that it was the famous sword of the sword demon, Skybreaker. It was originally an immortal treasure, however, in the process of resisting the 4 in 9 divine tribulations, the sword spirit perished and the sword body was damaged. Thus, it was brought to the ancient sword tomb by its master to be slowly nurtured by the power of the Feng Shui line. After 10,000 years, the sword body has basically been repaired. Although the sword spirit could not be reborn, it didn't affect the quality of the flying sword. Moreover, it just met Lu Li's requirement of a blank flying sword. Although the quality of this immortal sword has not been fully restored, as long as Lu Li diligently refined it, sooner or later, it would be able to regain its former glory. Its actual value was far higher than the one that Zhu Shiyao previously obtained. It was truly a priceless treasure. Regarding this, even Wang Lu was slightly envious. Although he certainly wouldn't covet Lu Li, he couldn't help but want to borrow it and play with it. Lu Li, of course, agreed. Okay, you can play with a meow. Wait a minute, what's a meow? Lu Li said, it's this flying sword. Master said that since the original sword spirit is no longer here, it's equivalent to a new flying sword. So, as its master I have to give it a new name. So it's called a meow? Wang Lu was speechless. He shook his head and took the a meow sword from Lu Li. The reason why he borrowed the sword from Lu Li was mainly to comprehend the essence of the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword from this sword of the sword demon. Now that the sword spirit was no longer here, perhaps the harvest would be very limited, but it was better than nothing. However, as soon as his palm touched the hilt, he felt a burst of dizziness in his head, as if he was hit by a heavy hammer. He couldn't think at all. Wang Lu hastily threw the sword back to Lu Li and asked, "What's the matter with this sword?" Lu Li said, "Master said that once this sword is refined, it will be connected with my mind, and the sword and I become one. Although I don't quite understand what it means, it should be a good thing, right?" "No, your master's meaning is actually very simple. This sword, in addition to you, if other people hold it, their IQ will drop." Chapter 275. After returning to the mountain, life was not as leisurely as expected. Although he had just recovered from a serious injury and needed to recuperate the most, and at the same time, the combination of primal chaos heaven-splitting sword and non-phase method also needed to be steadily studied, it was reasonable to say that Wang Lu should go into closed-door training for a long time. However, there were too many things that the sect needed Wang Lu to participate in, so he could not shirk it. After a short rest for a day or two, Wang Lu threw himself into the intense work. Although the proposal to set up a special committee to deal with Dixian's legacy was put forward by Feng Yin Taoist master, the original framework actually came from Wang Lu's idea. Moreover, Wang Lu also grasped the most critical element: the star atlas. Therefore, Wang Lu himself was duty-bound to participate in it. It could be said that the most critical reason why Lingjian School was able to get Shangjing sect to recognize its position in the committee was because of this star atlas. When Sword Demon projected the map image in Wang Lu's primordial spirit, he actually left behind a very mysterious seed. The more he studied it, the more he found out that it was infinitely mysterious. It was by no means a simple projection. In the future, when they found the key to open Dixian's tomb, Lingjian School could have a far higher efficiency than other sects by relying on this star atlas. And this benefit was not intended to be monopolized by Lingjian School. Now that the committee was established, it was just the right time to use this resource to win over allies. And when it came to such an important outreach work, how could Wang Lu, as the person involved, stay out of it? After returning to the mountain for a full month, he followed the sect leader Feng Yin around, contacting various sections. In addition to the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League, he also frequently contacted Wanxiang sect and other top-rank sections 2 months later. After numerous meetings and consultations, the overall framework of the committee was finally established. The committee was called the 9 Regions Tombs of Immortals Excavation Management Committee, or Excavation Management Committee for short. Among the 50 or so committee members, the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League took up 3/5 of the 30 spots, and the Lingjian School alone took up 10 spots. Other than the 9 elders that were often seen in the Heavenly Sword Hall, even Wang Lu was included. It was reasonable to say that only Yuanying stage cultivators could participate in this kind of committee meeting. The reason why the 5th elder of Spirit Sword Sect could be one of them was because she was the number 1 king pill in 9 regions. As for Wang Lu, who was not even a king pill, it was simply a miracle that he could be one of them. This also showed how influential Lingjian School was in the committee. 2 months ago in the ancient sword tomb, of course, it was impossible to reach this step. In the past 2 months, the hard work of the duo of Feng Yin Taoist master and Wang Lu could not go unnoticed. As for the standing committee members, they were represented by the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League. The influence of these 5 sects was superb. Although the other sects had their complaints, they could do nothing about it. When the list of the committee members was completely established and the rules of procedure were preliminarily drawn up, it was already 2 months later. Through Wang Lu's proposal, the first meeting of the Excavation Management Committee was arranged on a ship. Of course, it was not an ordinary cruise ship, but a giant spaceship sponsored by Shangjing sect, which could be called the most luxurious one in 9 regions. It was an ancient immortal tool that Shangjing sect people accidentally obtained when they excavated the immortal tomb. In its glorious period, it could soar in the sky like a dark cloud and release tens of thousands of golden armored soldiers. The bow of the ship was even installed with a land-sinking cannon. Let alone destroying a city, even sinking a corner of the continent was as easy as turning one's hand. Unfortunately, after experiencing the Age of Chaos, all of the combat devices on the spaceship have been damaged. Moreover, because of the change in the surrounding spiritual energy, it could no longer be repaired. Now, through the efforts of Shangjing sect people, it could finally fly again. However, first, it had no combat capability. Second, its flying speed was extremely slow, and it lacked the transportation capability. Finally, it was used by Shangjing sect people as a sect welfare for the elders and outstanding disciples to use for vacation and leisure. Shangjing sect people were rich and overbearing, so they modified this giant spaceship to be resplendent with all the necessary facilities. When it flew, it glittered with golden light, as if there was another sun in the sky. The Shangjing sect proudly called it the Rising Sun Fortress, while the other cultivators enviously called it local tycoon gold. Every day, they hoped that when it flew, it would encounter the astral winds of the 9th heaven or the dark clouds of thunder tribulation, thus falling down to their satisfaction. Wang Lu chose this place as the venue for the meeting, which was strongly supported by Shangjing sect. Although it was reasonable to say that Spirit Sword sect and Shangjing sect had various kinds of grievances, in the face of big benefits, the past contradictions were like passing clouds.
Now that the excavation management had been established, it was the time when the morale of the members was condensed and everyone was united.
In order to show their sincerity and strength, under the instruction of Hichu Daoren, Xueqi sect signed a long-term preferential lease contract with the excavation management, renting out this local tycoon gold giant spaceship for public use. At the same time, the insiders could also enjoy a very low discount for private use. In the first meeting, almost all of the more than 50 committee members were present. When they landed on the Rising Sun Fortress, most of them felt that their pair of dog eyes had been blinded. Wang Lu also repeatedly clicked his tongue, thinking that his cloud wave boat might as well be sold at a low price. But then he thought, if he were to defect to Xueqi sect now, what kind of price tag would the opposite party offer? In any case, he was a well-known person in 9 regions. Xueqi sect, this kind of rich and overbearing sect, might be able to offer quite a generous premium. As for the agenda of the meeting, there was nothing to write home about. First of all, the chairman, Feng Yin Taoist master, gave a speech and made a work report, completing the basic work of establishing rules and regulations. Then Wang Lu, as the representative of the party concerned, made a special report to the meeting, which described in detail the formation principle of the group of immortal tombs and so on. Then, the meeting arranged the work of looking for the key, the initial establishment of the information exchange channel. As for the further work, it could only be discussed at the next meeting. After a day of meeting, Xueqi sect hosted the excavation management to investigate and research on the Rising Sun Fortress for 3 days. After that, the guests and the host were happy and happily left. During this period, a great elder of Xueqi sect paid a special visit to Wang Lu and gave him a thoughtful gift. I heard that you have an immortal beast friend. I hope this book can help her. At the same time, I also hope that the past misunderstanding will not affect our future cooperation. Looking at the amiable smile of Supreme Tianyu in front of him, Wang Lu sincerely admired the face of Xueqi sect people. A few months ago, they were still as harsh and rude as a bandit, but today, unexpectedly, they could put down their face and apologize to him as a Supreme of Unity stage. It was no wonder that Supreme Tianyu, who was known for being rude and unreasonable, could still muddle along until today. To put it bluntly, this guy had the face of a villain. But to put it nicely, his skill of making the best use of the situation was really profound. For Tianyu's gift, Wang Lu calmly accepted it. The book was written by Tianyu himself, which recorded his experience as a demon cultivator, from the opening of his spiritual wisdom to the promotion to unity stage. Although in terms of foundation and aptitude, Tianyu was far from being comparable to the immortal beast by Xueqi, the cultivation experience of a Supreme of Unity stage still had its value. Accepting the book could be considered as having settled a grudge for the time being. After playing on the airship for a few days, Wang Lu followed his uncle's sect leader back to Spirit Sword Mountain. This time, he could finally relax after returning to the mountain. The key task of the Excavation Management Committee. Searching for the key was not something that could be completed in 3 or 5 days, so there was no need to rush. After being busy for a few months, Feng Yin Taoist master also proposed to take a break for a period of time. Therefore, Wang Lu finally had the time to sort out his own cultivation. Of course, he had no choice but to sort it out. The direct cause of this matter was when he returned to Spirit Sword Mountain after the meeting. He received the letter of challenge from his big sister, Xueqi. Big sister was a straightforward person. She would do whatever she wanted to do without too much consideration. In the ancient sword tomb, she fought against Wang Lu several times, but there was no clear winner. After the injury of her primordial spirit was healed, she couldn't help but want to decide the winner between her and Wang Lu. Unfortunately, Wang Lu has been busy with the committee's work and had no time to deal with her. At this time, seeing that Wang Lu had some free time, Xueqi could no longer hold back. In this regard, Wang Lu calmly accepted it. Although his big sister's stellar divine eyes were indeed powerful, his broken sword world was also not a small matter. As the biggest winner in the ancient sword tomb, he already had enough confidence. However, after the fight, the result was somewhat unexpected. Wang Lu did win, but it was because of the opponent's mistake. Xueqi slightly wavered at the critical moment, and Wang Lu took the opportunity to defeat her. Later on, when he asked, it turned out that Xueqi's primordial spirit was advancing by leaps and bounds, and her stage was not stable. She was eager to fight, so regardless of her poor condition, she asked her master to help lock her primordial spirit, which could only bring out 60 to 70% of her ability. As a result, in the fierce fight, her fighting spirit surged up and accidentally broke her master's seal. Suddenly, her primordial spirit shook and revealed its flaw, which made her extremely regrettable loss. Thus, the quality of this victory was really discounted. The opponent's primordial spirit was only able to bring out 60 to 70% of its ability, which was simply an unfair victory. However, this was purely Zhu Shiyao's own fault. In short, Wang Lu knew that his progress was indeed not small, but if he slightly relaxed, he would be overtaken by others. Whether it was Zhu Shiyao or Lu Li, their strength was advancing by leaps and bounds, and their future was bright. However, he himself seemed to be standing at the crossroads, and his future was still hazy. In the ancient sword tomb, his biggest harvest was the group of immortal tombs. However, as an individual, his main harvest was the primal chaos heaven-splitting sword that was passed down by Sword Demon. Regardless of whether Sword Demon taught him this set of method for possession or something else, there was no problem with the method itself. Moreover, what was even more rare was, after leaving the ancient sword tomb, it didn't lose its effect because of the change in the surrounding spiritual energy. This was a divine sword that could be passed down through the ages, so its value was beyond doubt. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a true immortal-level sword technique. However, on the other hand, right before his eyes, his master personally demonstrated the awe-inspiring might of her non-phase method. The 4 sect's elders were helpless against the 4 in 9 divine tribulations, but she was able to overcome them all the way. Even Sword Demon himself was full of praise for her non-phase method, saying that it might not be suitable for him. However, now it seemed that if he could successfully cultivate the non-phase method, he could even withstand the 4 in 9 divine tribulations, which seemed to be a road for him. Just like in the instance, when other people were painstakingly studying how to push down the guardian monster, he could directly withstand the monster's attack to open the treasure chest, take away the loot, and then turn around to leave. Thinking about it, it was simply too awesome. So, you came to ask for my opinion? On the non-phase peak, Wang Wu had nothing to say about her disciple's diligence and inquisitiveness. You have the nerve to mention this matter in front of me. I have painstakingly taught you immortal cultivation for 10 years, and I have been wholeheartedly devoted to you. However, in the blink of an eye, you changed your mind and became infatuated with this inexplicable heaven-splitting divine sword. And now, you even shamelessly come to ask for my opinion? Wang Lu was silent for a moment. It shows that I still have feelings for you. Bah! Feelings my ass! You're obviously having an affair. Wang Lu thought for a moment and then decided to cut the Gordian knot. Recently, Wisdom Sect is in a tight spot, so they have to borrow a huge amount of money from the mysterious Sky Mansion, so their liquidity is basically gone. His master's fierce, imposing manner suddenly softened. Oh, forget it. It's the primal chaos heaven-splitting divine sword. If you want to learn it, then learn it. After all, non-phase method is a cultivation method that I created under extreme conditions, so its limitation is not small. You have outstanding talent, so having your own ideas is also a good thing. Wang Lu said, Master, no matter what, this is an immortal-level cultivation method. Are you not interested in learning it? Humph. What's wrong with an immortal-level cultivation method? Is it rare? Wang Wu indifferently said, in our Lingjian school, the immortal-level cultivation method is actually not limited to stellar sword method and brilliant sword heart. When a cultivator's cultivation base reaches a certain level, there's no need to covet other people's cultivation method. Whether it's an immortal-level cultivation method or any other level, the one that suits you is the best. However, right now, you haven't even succeeded in cultivating the King Pill, so you can't say that you have your own path, so there's no harm in dabbling in it. However, because of this, I suggest you not to rush to cultivate the King Pill. Wang Lu nodded. I also have the same intention. In the ancient sword tomb, after absorbing the sea of bitterness left behind by the sword demon, Wang Lu could take this opportunity to quickly advance his cultivation base. In about 3 to 5 years, he could successfully cultivate the King Pill. However, achieving the King Pill was by no means a trivial matter. For most of the cultivators in 9 regions, it was a lifelong dream that was difficult to reach. For those cultivators with extraordinary talents, the Golden Core stage was also a stage that determined their fate. When a cultivator successfully cultivated the King Pill, they would initially combine the great Tao of heaven and earth, and then form their own path. After that, Yuanying, deity, and so on were all changes in the cultivator's life essence, but they would no longer be separated from the Tao established by the King Pill. Therefore, Wang Wu's double King Pill was shocking. Just like how a loyal minister would not serve two masters, a cultivator would not walk two paths at the same time. Now it seemed that behind the awe-inspiring divine power, there must be a great side effect. For example, her failure to advance to Yuanying might be related to it. Wang Wu did not intend to let her disciple repeat her own mistakes, so she could not afford to lose the King Pill. Combining the advantages of heaven-splitting sword and non-phase method to form a unique cultivation method system, the idea is indeed good, but whether it is really suitable or not, it needs to be tested by time. Although this time, your senior sister did not have the glory as you did, the benefits she got were no less than you. She also knows Primal Chaos Heaven-Splitting Sword, and the sword spirit root is easier to absorb and digest. Her primordial spirit cultivation base has advanced by leaps and bounds, and soon she will condense her body. Her strength can be said to have advanced by leaps and bounds, so, in addition to cultivating in the mountain, you'd better take the time to gain experiential learning. Aren't you looking for the key now? It's a rare opportunity to gain experiential learning at public expense, Wang Wu said and then gently took a sip of tea. Don't worry, look for it slowly. Chapter 276. His master's words came true. The excavation management search for the key progressed very slowly. 3 years had passed since the establishment of the excavation management and the first meeting. According to the rules of the excavation management, the term of office of the chairman was only 10 years. In a trance, Feng Yin Taoist master's impassioned speech at the first meeting, looking forward to a better future, still appeared in front of them. However, 3 years later, the initial enthusiasm gradually faded, and the problem surfaced. That legendary key. Where was it?
3 years was not a long time. It was far from enough for the cultivators of the excavation management to search the entire land of the 9 prefectures.
This key that had been missing for more than 10,000 years was destined to not be found so easily. However, after 3 whole years, not even a single clue was found. It was inevitable that people would be discouraged and even criticize it. In the past 3 years, under the leadership of Taoist Master Feng Yin, almost all the large and small sects of the Union of 10,000 Immortals participated in the search, which consumed countless manpower and material resources. In just a few years, the maintenance cost of the Rising Sun Fortress was about to become astronomical. However, the search was fruitless. The key was still nowhere to be found. Moreover, the more they searched, the more desperate they became. Because in the past 3 years, people had checked one immortal treasure after another. Shengjing sect even opened their treasure house and checked dozens of immortal treasures, regardless of whether they could be used or not, one by one. However, in the end, not even the slightest clue was found. There was an ancient fable that was passed down from the Western continent. It said that in order to select the right material, an inventor made more than 3,000 failed experiments. However, he used each failure as the cornerstone of victory, and finally he succeeded. However, in fact, a fable was just a story. In practice, let alone more than 3,000 failures, even 300 or even 30 times were enough. If you don't believe it, if someone suddenly failed while having sex with his girlfriend, 1 or 2 times was fine. But after failing 3,000 times in a row, do you think the other party would wait for the 3,001st time to regain their masculinity? Taoist Master Feng Yin was facing such a predicament. In the past 3 years, it could be said that there was almost no progress. In addition to the increasingly bloated organizational structure of the Excavation Management Committee and the increasingly beautiful promise of the future, there was no substantial progress. Thus, people began to doubt. Was the spiritual master of Lingjian's school really reliable? Even though his personal cultivation wasn't bad, and he was also the head of one of the 5 uniques, but Lingjian School's population was sparse, and their interactions with the outside world were not ordinary. Among the 5 uniques, it was publicly acknowledged that they were relatively backward and closed off. In this kind of sect, their management level was naturally unable to be reflected. Furthermore, Feng Yin Taoist Master had been the chairman of the Excavation Management Committee for the past 3 years, and his work progress was close to 0, which seemed to prove this point. This pressure was nothing to Feng Yin, who had experienced great storms and waves, but he couldn't really remain indifferent. Thus, this perfected deity stage cultivator frequently used the star diffraction technique to forcefully search for clues. With his level, if he were to seriously deduce, ordinary celestial treasures wouldn't be able to hide at all. However, after 3 years, Feng Yin didn't find anything, and even he himself was slightly discouraged. On this day, he once again failed to deduce anything. In desperation, he called Wang Lu over and asked him to tell him what he saw and heard that day. After all, the person who talked to Zhong Shengming was Wang Lu, not him. Tell me the conversation that day again, and see if there are any clues that we haven't found yet. Wang Lu sighed and said, Sect Master Sherbo, I have already answered this question no less than 10 times. You can also recite the conversation between me and Zhong Shengming. Why do you still ask? Feng Yin said, this time, tell me in a different tone, I'll try to find some inspiration. Wang Lu helplessly said, Sect Master people who can't. Even if the bed partner changes to 48 positions, it's still impossible to make the eunuch rise.
The sect leader was even unable to get angry at this kind of treacherous words and deeds that compared the sect leader to a eunuch.
Thinking about it, Wang Lu's words were not unreasonable. Over the past few days, he had really racked his brains and deduced all the possibilities. He did not even hesitate to go to the savage land, but he still found nothing. This was not a problem that could be solved simply by hard work. In fact, if hard work could solve the problem, why would he be criticized for 3 years? Thinking of this, the sect leader's heart was moved and he decided to take a risk. What? Sect leader, are you kidding me? You want to find 8th junior brother?
In the Spirit Pool Peaks Assembly Hall, when the regular elders' meeting was about to end, the second elder Lucien was surprised to hear the request of the sect leader. The other elders also stared with round eyes, waiting for the further explanation of the sect leader.
Feng Yin also had a helpless look. It's about the group of immortal tombs. I'm at a loss here, so I can only consider letting the professionals do it.
Senior brother, you must not. The third elder Feng he sternly interrupted. Although the group of immortal tombs is of great importance, Dixian's inheritance is, after all, just a worldly possession. And 8th junior brother. The price is too heavy, we must not be careless.
Feng Yin wryly smiled. If even you say that, then it's just superstition. Feng He's voice was even louder. Senior brother, even if there's no reliable theory to support it, but the fact is better than all the theory, this is not wrong. With that, Feng He shook his head. He felt that his harsh words were too rude to the sect leader, so he hurriedly apologized and then lowered his voice. 8th junior brother's treasure hunting ability is indeed disdainful of the world, but every time he goes out to explore and collect ancient treasures, he would inevitably cause great trouble. 80 years ago, he found the immortal treasure Red Gourd, but it also released the Golden Horned King, a remnant of the demon race from the Great War of Immortals and Demons. 70 years ago, he looked for a summoned beast and provoked a strange beast from overseas. 60 years ago, he accidentally broke the insect poison in the Western continent, which led to a biochemical crisis. The last time, 50 years ago, was... Okay, we all know about 8th junior brother's great achievements.
Seeing that the atmosphere in the meeting hall was getting more and more gloomy, the second elder, Lucien, quickly interrupted the third elder's recollection.
Feng Yin sighed, nodded and said, Third brother, I understand what you mean, I don't intend to let him act, but it's a pity to not use his treasure hunting ability. It's better to find him first and ask for his opinion. Rest assured, it's just to ask for advice. I won't let him go out of the mountain. Feng He was obviously still worried, but since sect leader senior brother had said it like this, it was not convenient for him to refute. Not to mention that he was also a member of the excavation management, so he was very clear about the pressure his senior brother was under. After the meeting, Feng Yin Taoist master summoned his 8th junior brother to Stellar Peak to ask for advice. Not long after, a young man in luxurious clothes ran in excitedly. Senior brother, I heard that you're looking for an immortal treasure, but you can't find it no matter what? Haha, don't worry, leave it to me. As long as you tell me the basic characteristics of this thing, I will find it for you within a month. While talking, the young man untied the wine gourd from his waist and drank half of the gourd in one go. His face turned red, and he looked extremely excited. Senior brother, just say it, I'll go now. Never procrastinate. All these years, because the 8th elder went out to look for treasures, he constantly stirred up trouble and was forbidden to go out of the mountain by the Heavenly Sword Hall. At this time, when he heard from his 5th senior sister that the sex prohibition might be loosened, he was immediately excited. Seeing this scene, Feng Yin Taoist master also had a headache. Alas, You should know about the group of immortal tombs.
Oh, the group of immortal tombs. I seem to be a member of the excavation management.
However, I only attended the first meeting, and before I could enjoy myself, I was dragged back by senior brother.
Feng Yin angrily said. Nonsense, otherwise, when you go to Shangjing's sect at night, wouldn't you provoke an unmanageable big trouble?
I won't be discovered. Do you think Shangjing's sect people are just decorations? Feng Yin scolded him a few times and then changed the topic. So far, there's no clue about the key to the group of immortal tombs.
I've used the stellar star diffraction technique to deduce it hundreds of times, and I've personally traveled all over the 9 regions, but all along, I haven't been able to gain anything. According to Wang Lu, the key must exist, moreover, it's an immortal treasure. However, after 3 years of fruitless search, could it be that he's wrong? When it came to business, the 8th elder's complexion suddenly turned serious. Senior brother, speaking of which, I still clearly remember the 3 clues that Wang Lu told me about Zhong Shangming, which are the most important clues in the search for the key.
Therefore, I've always wondered why you guys didn't pay attention to it. Feng Yin curiously said. How could we not pay attention to it?
Wang Lu even made a big heart demon oath in front of the entire excavation management to guarantee that his clues are absolutely correct. In the past 3 years, he has always been guided by those 3 clues and never ignored them.
The 8th elder said with a smile. That's even more wrong. Senior brother, do you remember what the 3rd clue is?
Feng Yin said, 3rd, if you really can't find the clue in the known area, you might as well look further. 16,000 years is more than enough time for anything to happen.
Yes, right now, you can't find the clue in the known area, so why don't you look further? Feng Yin wryly smiled. How far can it be?
2 months ago, I just came back from Penglai Island, and I even had a fight with the island master and snatched her water moon pearl for inspection. As a result, I was cursed by her for 2 months. The 8th elder curiously asked, Is it the Penglai Island master who has a rumor with you?
Feng Nu angrily said. Rumor my ass. It was Wang Wu, that bastard, who was talking nonsense. She even dared to ask me for hush money.
Seeing that his senior brother was angry out of shame, the 8th elder quickly changed the topic.
That's why I said, senior brother. You guys are strange. You even ran away from the overseas immortal island. Why don't you just run further? Feng Yin snappily said, How far? Do you want me to go to the western continent? Speaking to this, Feng Yin was suddenly startled.
Then the 8th elder nodded and said, Yes, if I were you, I would have already gone to the western continent.
Upon hearing this, Feng Yin suddenly felt enlightened. Damn it, I'm really narrow-minded. I thought that the treasure of 9 regions can only be found in 9 regions, but I didn't think that after 10,000 years, what can't happen? Not to mention that for thousands of years, the eastern and western continent have frequent exchanges. Isn't there a famous chef from the western continent on the mountain? Chapter 277. The key that the excavation management had been searching for 3 years was in the western continent.
Perhaps it was because there was no such thing as an impenetrable wall in this world, or perhaps it was because the news of the Lingjian school frequently searching for information about the western continent had spread like wildfire, or perhaps there were always people who were good at treasure hunting and the 8th elder of Heavenly Sword Hall who thought alike.
In short, the news about the western continent had recently become a hot topic in the immortal cultivation world of 9 regions. The western continent referred to the west.
After crossing the endless ocean to the west of the 9 regions, the land at the junction of the sea and sky was the western continent.
Needless to say, the first time the cultivators of 9 regions arrived in the western continent was tens of thousands of years ago. At that time, the cultivators of 9 regions had just come out from the Age of Desolation. When they went to the western continent, they thought that they could find a paradise. However, what they saw was a desolate and barren land. The surrounding spiritual energy was thin, and there was no law of the great Tao of 9 regions. For cultivators, it was simply a dead end. Disappointed, they withdrew. In addition to leaving the name of the western continent, they didn't find anything else. After tens of thousands of years, a cargo ship that crossed the ocean arrived at the west coast of the 9 regions.
The people of 9 regions were surprised to find that the western continent had unknowingly developed a vigorous civilization. With the increasingly close communication between the 2 continents, more and more western continent people entered 9 regions, and people gradually gained a bit more understanding of the former barren land. However, to this day, the Western continent was still a mysterious place for most of the people of 9 regions. In addition to knowing that there were different races and different civilizations, they still didn't know the specific situation. There were a lot of Western continent people who entered 9 regions, but most of them were merchants and mercenaries. 9 regions people were even less willing to leave their homeland and go to the Western continent. After all, although the Western continent civilization was good, it was not as prosperous as the 9 regions. Thousands of years ago, there were several enthusiastic 9 regions cultivators, master and disciple, who went to the Western continent and took the scriptures of the largest religion in the Western continent back to 9 regions. Not only did they develop the religion of the Western continent in 9 regions, they also brought the real seed of the Western continent civilization. Their heroic story of going through countless hardships and dangers on their journey to the West to obtain Buddhist scriptures was compiled into a book by later scholars. It was named Journey to the West. Among the master and disciples, eldest Marshall brother was the most beloved. That cultivator surnamed Sun was known for his fiery temperament and for being upright and outspoken. Unfortunately, the good times didn't last long. After they took the scriptures and practiced according to them, and finally established the sect, the eldest brother, who was the great elder of the sect, suffered from chi deviation and his primordial spirit was scattered. Later, although he was rescued by their master, his temperament changed greatly. From an upright and plain-spoken person, he became brainless. All day long, he said some sensational remarks, such as after believing in the Lord, he knew that the civilization of 9 regions originally came from the Western continent, and so on. His image plummeted, and the originally illustrious saint of war also became a silly saint. The sect that the master and the disciples painstakingly established also became unknown as time went by. A good opportunity for the exchange between the East and the West civilization died prematurely. In short, today's 9 regions people's understanding of the Western continent was still limited. Their contact was limited to several countries that had a close business relationship with the 9 regions. However, the number of countries and city-states in the Western continent far exceeded that of the 9 regions. Most of the regions were still mysterious. This time, they speculated that the key to the group of immortal tombs might be in the Western continent. Thus, before they went to the Western continent, they naturally had to do their homework, so that they could be prepared. For a time, books and records about the Western continent became extremely popular in the 9 regions. The merchants who often traveled between the Eastern and Western continent also became very popular. This craze lasted for several months. Finally, the excavation management, in the name of the committee, integrated a team of more than 10 people and led a group of attendants and translators to the Western continent to look for the key to the group of immortal tombs. At the same time, the big and small sects also received the news and organized their own expeditionary forces. After all, the key to the group of immortal tombs was of great importance, and the reward offered by the excavation management was particularly tempting. Even the 5 uniques of the Wanxian League each sent their own private army to get the key first and fight for a bigger voice in the excavation management. And in the Lingzhen school, this private army mission fell on Wang Lu's head. Of course, it was more accurate to say that this mission was fought for by non-phase peak self-recommendation. At first, the sect leader Feng Yin didn't want Wang Lu to participate in the expedition to the Western continent. First, these 3 years were the critical period for Wang Lu to consolidate his foundation and prepare for the King Pill. Second, the Western continent was by no means a good place for cultivators. Because of the difference in the laws of the great Tao of heaven and earth, ordinary cultivators simply could not display much of their ability in the Western continent. If their cultivation base was not stable enough, there was even the danger of their magical power collapsing. Only by advancing to the King Pill and condensing the great Tao of heaven and earth in the Jade Mansion could one maintain one's strength in a place with different laws. Whether it was the excavation management's expeditionary army or the private army of the other sects, all of them were King Pill cultivators or above, and very few of them were shoot-on-stage cultivators. Of course, with the solid foundation of Wang Lu's cultivation base, even if he only had shoot-on-stage cultivation base, his Jade Mansion would not collapse after entering the Western continent. At most, his strength would be limited. However, when his cultivation base was advancing by leaps and bounds, suddenly changing his cultivation environment was definitely not a good thing. However, Wang Wu proposed that before Wang Lu's King Pill was completed, he should have more experience, which would be helpful for his further cultivation. After all, she was Wang Lu's master, so she had the most authority on Wang Lu's cultivation. Feng Yin argued with her for a bit, but seeing that she seemed to be seriously proposing it instead of her usual loss of moral integrity, he no longer insisted and just let her be. Therefore, the important task of going to the Western continent, looking for the key to the group of immortal tombs, opening the Dixian treasure house, and enriching the small treasury of my non-phase peak will be handed over to you. The point is the last sentence, right? Rest assured, I already have a plan in mind, 90% sure. Wang Wu was particularly surprised. You're so confident? That's the mysterious Western continent. This time, sect leader senior brother will lead the team, supported by various sects, and a gathering of heroes, but I don't dare to say that I have too much certainty. Where did your confidence come from? Wang Lu said with a smile. A gathering of heroes? I think it's just a motley crew. Uncle Feng Yin, as the chairman of the excavation management, has become muddled. Although there are many strong people in the team, they have no tacit understanding with each other. Instead, they have a lot of hatred toward each other. When they arrive at the Western continent, that unfamiliar place, if they don't kill each other, it's already good enough. It's not realistic to expect them to cooperate with each other sincerely. Hee, I heard that even Supreme Tianyu has been added to the team, which really makes people doubt whether Uncle Sect Leader has the sincerity to look for the key. In this regard, his master smiled but said nothing. What about you? You're just a shoot-on stage cultivator. Can you do better than them? Even if they only have a bit of skill, they're still far better than you. Tisk, so what if I'm a shoot-on stage cultivator? As a master, aren't you also in the King Pill stage? Moreover, there are 2 of them, plus your precious emerald green bamboo sword. You're a real man. Hey, I'm the #1 King Pill in 9 regions. You better respect me a bit. In short, we're going to look for things, not to fight. Is it important to have a high or low cultivation base? We should use our brains to find things, not our fists. I don't think sect leader Marshall Uncle's brain is very clear. He didn't take a good shortcut, but instead chose to find a bunch of mobs as his teammates and a bunch of ignorant people as his followers. So you have a shortcut. Of course, I'll wait for the good news. After ending the conversation with his master, Wang Lu went straight to the Misty Peak cafeteria. When it came to a shortcut, wasn't it obvious that there was one? The biggest problem with this trip to the West was that they were unfamiliar with the people and the place. Therefore, the role of a translator and guide was actually more important than those Taoist masters and supreme with brute force. And when it came to a guide, there was a ready-made guide here. Through these years of daily contact, Wang Lu was very clear that the Western continent chef was by no means an ordinary person. Her speech and behavior all reflected the characteristics of the people in the Western continent. Occasionally, when they talked in depth, it showed that she was knowledgeable. Such a person must be a descendant of the emperor in the Western continent, which was far better than the so-called professional guide hired by the excavation management from the west coast of 9 regions. Those guides had lived in the eastern part of the Western continent for a period of time. Most of them were civilians, barely qualified to lead a tour. Wanting to find a treasure that had been lost for thousands of years in the Western continent was simply whimsical. Entering the cafeteria, Wang Lu didn't hurry to open his mouth. He just ordered a few side dishes, which made the chef beaming with joy, and then went to the main topic. Aya, have you ever heard of a treasure that can create the world in your Western continent? Aya blinked her pair of green eyes and said with a smile, Of course, there are a lot of them. As far as I know, there are more than 1,000 kinds of legends about the creation of the world in the Western continent. Among them, there are nearly 100 that are supported by real objects, Wang Lu said. It has to be a bit more reliable, the kind that can really split open the world. According to the standard here, it has to be an immortal treasure. Aya was surprised. The requirement is so high. Creation of the world, and it's also an immortal treasure. Then there's only one. As far as I know, only the Golden King's sword of creation is a genuine creation of the world. You want to find it? Yes, in fact, if possible, I hope you can go with me. Aya was quite surprised by Wang Lu's invitation. You want me to go with you? I'm afraid not. Wang Lu said with a smile. Don't worry, this is a public travel, the budget is unlimited, and you will be satisfied. As soon as his voice fell, Aya's face turned serious. I'm sorry, that's even worse. ? Wang Lu curiously looked at Aya. Aya sternly said, I oppose the private use of public funds. Facing Aya's infinite righteous look, Wang Lu froze for a quarter of an hour, not knowing what to say. You said you oppose public funds. Aya nodded and said, from a small family to a big country, everything should be done in accordance with the rules. As for public expenditure, every cent should be carefully and cautiously, and must not be arbitrarily misappropriated and squandered. This is my code of conduct. Wang Lu asked, these words sound so righteous. All these years, hasn't your Misty Peak cafeteria ever hosted public banquets? Aya's tone was even more indifferent. Never, so there's no need to talk about it anymore. The cafeteria is closed. Please come back another day. At the end of her words, her voice was cold, as if she wanted him to leave. After rolling out of the Misty Peak cafeteria, Wang Lu secretly scolded himself for being muddle-headed. With Aya's cooking skills, which elder would eat and drink at the Misty Peak cafeteria with public funds? Even if the public funds were public, one could not cherish them, but their stomach was their own, right? Alas, no wonder Aya was angry, but in the end, this is really a chef who has broken away from vulgar tastes. However, the more it is like this, the more I like you. Gee, as a qualified chef, how can you miss the responsibility of saving the world? Chapter 278. Chef, I see that you have a big head and thick neck. You are the best candidate for the treasure hunt in the West. I will give you this VIP meal ticket, and the important task of escorting me to the Western continent to find the key will fall on you. Get lost. To be able to make the always modest and courteous Misty Peak chef say such straightforward words, it could be considered as a kind of ability. In the past 2 days, among the cultivators of Spirit Sword sect who occasionally passed by the Misty Peak, the most common thing they saw was Wang Lu walking into the cafeteria with a face full of interest, but a moment later, he returned in frustration. In the past few days, he had become a laughingstock. Wang Lu's reputation in Spirit Sword sect was quite resounding. In less than 13 years, he had already reached middle-level shoot-on stage, and his actual combat ability was on the level of King Pill, far above his peers. Even many seniors who had been cultivating for 20 or 30 years could only stare blankly at him. What was even more surprising was his ability to deal with practical matters. Since his debut, he went down the mountain to establish the Wisdom sect, contended against the 10,000 Art Sex Exchange team, overthrew the Beast Master School division of the Grand Cloud Mountain, developed the ancient sword tomb. Any one of these was enough to make him famous. Now, not to mention Spirit Sword sect, even in the entire immortal cultivation world of 9 regions, Wang Lu was a well-known figure. However, this seemingly omnipotent well-known figure had been repeatedly defeated in the Misty Peak cafeteria, which immediately aroused people's great curiosity. Unfortunately, every time Wang Lu and Aya talked, it was a secret. Although people were curious, they could only let their imagination run wild. For example, Wang Lu and Aya had actually been having an affair for a long time. As early as 10 years ago, Wang Lu fell in love with Aya at first sight. After several years of continuous pursuit, he finally moved her heart. Otherwise, there was no way to explain why he often came to the Misty Peak cafeteria to eat, but now, because of emotional discord, they broke up. Several times, they negotiated about abortion, breakup fee, and other issues, but to no avail. Wang Lu, who was born a poor loser, tried to bribe her with a meal ticket, which aroused Aya's great anger. Thus, the matter fell into an impasse. Such vulgar rumors gradually spread in Spirit Sword sect. Although Wang Lu's reputation was not bad, after a long time, many people still doubted it. It was not that they didn't believe in Wang Lu's character, but it was said that the original source of such rumors came from Non-Phase Peak. This undoubtedly increased the weight of the rumor. As for Wang Lu, he had been annoyed by Aya for the past few days, so he was too lazy to care about the bad behavior of a bored person who took the opportunity to slander him. If Aya's problem was not solved, he really had no interest in considering other things. During this period, he had used various methods to probe her. Aya really seemed to have no intention of going west. Let alone going west, she didn't even want to leave Spirit Sword Mountain. But this was strange. From Wang Lu's point of view, Aya was completely different from the lady boss. She was not the kind of nerd who shut herself in. Although she lived a quiet and comfortable life in the Misty Peaks cafeteria, when they occasionally chatted, it was hard to conceal the rare heroism of a woman. If such a person were to be placed outside, he would at least be a hero. How could he be at ease as a chef in the cafeteria? The key point was that he was not even a professional chef. Aya, what's your problem? Why don't you tell me? We've been fair-weather friends for so many years. How could I not help you? In this regard, Aya just smiled indifferently. I appreciate your kindness, but if there's really a problem, before you go up the mountain, wouldn't I ask the other elders to help me? Let's not talk about this anymore. Wang Lu was also at his wit's end, so he had no choice but to say, could it be that your body has been taken by that old fart sect leader? Rest assured, I'll put celery juice in his tea to avenge you. Get lost. He didn't know how many times he had gotten lost. Fortunately, each time, he could still enter the Misty Peaks cafeteria the next day when it was open as usual. However, the problem could not be solved, which inevitably made him depressed. After thinking about it, Wang Lu had no choice but to use his killer move. Master, what's going on with Aya? The so-called killer move was naturally to ask for help from an insider. As the saying goes, know yourself and know your enemy, and you will win every battle. Aya had her reasons for being so attached to the Misty Peaks cafeteria. When the reason was unclear, Wang Lu couldn't easily use many means. After all, Aya and him could be regarded as half teacher and half friend, and his non-phase sword art had a bit of shadow of Aya's swordsmanship. Therefore, when the situation was unclear, it was inevitable that his hands and feet would be tied. To find out the situation, the first choice was, of course, to ask the person herself. Unfortunately, Wang Lu tried several times, but Aya did not respond. As for the other elders, after all, they were not as familiar with each other as his master. TSK, you finally know how to ask people, not trying to be brave anymore? His master had been waiting for him at the non-phase peak for a long time. Aya's problem is actually very simple. It's not that she doesn't want to go, but she can't go. Can't go? Wang Lu was taken aback and directly jumped up from his chair. Sure enough, that old fart sect leader took her body and then used her son as a hostage? Wang Wu gawked for a moment and then clapped her hands in praise. Good idea. Tomorrow, I'll spread this rumor. If that old fart doesn't give me a raise, I won't clarify it. Master, if you don't court death, you won't die. Why don't you understand? However, seeing his master's response, Wang Lu also knew that his guess was probably 10,000 miles off. What the hell is going on? It's a long story, but where should I start? Wang Wu knocked the table with her knuckles, pondered for a moment, and then asked, You and Aya have known each other for more than 10 years, so you should have a certain understanding of her. In your opinion, what is her character? Wang Lu thought for a moment. Generally speaking, she is an upright, serious, humble, and polite person with a strong sense of responsibility. It can be seen that she is a bit competitive, but for some reason, she has restrained herself a lot. In addition, although there is no overbearingness in her speech, she is indifferent and familiar with many people and things, which is clearly the reaction of a person in a high position. It gives people the feeling that she is a noble lord or the ruler of a country. It's really hard to imagine why she is a part-time chef here. Well, the speculation is basically correct. She is indeed a king. Of course, now she can only be regarded as the ruler of a subjugated country. Wang Lu was surprised. Is it because she cooks for her people? Wang Wu looked at her disciple coldly. You can try to say the same to her. I still understand the principle of not courting death. You will not die. Please continue. There are too many reasons why her country was torn apart and destroyed by the hands of others, but her own personality also played a large part. You should have expected this, so I won't go into details. Wang Lu nodded. It was very clear that with Aya's particularly serious personality, she was actually not suitable to be the leader, especially the leader of a country. It was not unusual whether it was the Xing country or the kingdom. However, because of her personality, she was not reconciled after the fall of her country. She wholeheartedly blamed the suffering of all living beings on herself, and felt remorseful. There are many stories behind this, but in short, when she was at a loss, she heard a rumor. In the distant eastern continent, there is a magical way to win a war. The way to win a war? Wang Lu frowned and said, Is it a cheat? If you interrupt again, I won't tell you. Listen, you and I are both from 9 regions, so naturally, we are dismissive of the way to win a war. But for Aya at that time, it was the only hope in the darkness. Therefore, she went through untold hardships to come to the east, just to find the way to win a war. During this period, she met a senior brother of the Heavenly Sword Hall, and by chance coincidence, she was left on the mountain. Wait a minute, there is too much missing information. Her confused mind was not clear. It's fine if she was looking for a groundless cheat, but what about when she met a heavenly sword hall elder and was left on the mountain? Could it be that the elder deceived her, saying that as long as she was a chef for 100 years, he would reward her with a way to win a war, and then slowly enlighten her to put down the burden and move on to a new life? Although she is straightforward, she is not an idiot. Speaking to this, Wang Wu's expression slightly dimmed. How could it be that simple? When the senior brothers met her, she was already at the end of her rope, and what supported her was her obsession. She has been wandering in 9 regions for many years, so how could she not know that the so-called way to win a war is completely false? However, once this obsession disappears, the whole person will also die. When the senior brothers saw her, they sighed with emotion at her life's experience, so they brought her back to the mountain and used the power of Spirit Sword Mountain to help her condense her soul and maintain her vitality. But this is just a temporary solution. Once she leaves Spirit Sword Mountain, she will immediately disappear. Wang Lu was surprised. What is this thing? It can actually change according to the will of the mind, and once she leaves the mountain, she will disappear? Wang Wu coldly said. What else could it be? It's the undead. Undead. Although from a rational point of view, according to the previous clues and reasoning, this answer was simply logical. However, thinking of Aya's usual smile and voice. Wait a minute. This word was somewhat wrong. But in short, it was really hard for Wang Lu to imagine that the heroic girl was actually a dead person. Of course it's not an ordinary wandering ghost. Have you ever seen an undead that is the same as a real person? It has a heartbeat, body temperature, shadow, clear thinking. She is a spirit of the brave departed. Wang Wu sighed. When she was alive, she had outstanding meritorious service and was revered and worshipped by thousands of people. She was upright and outspoken, has a bright and upright temperament, and also has obsession. After death, she may become a spirit of the brave departed. Of course, ordinary spirits of the brave departed are not as good as her. Her soul must be pure and untainted, and the will of the people is extremely strong. At the same time, her primordial spirit must be extremely powerful. Coupled with extremely special conditions, only then can she condense into such a vivid spirit of the brave departed. Wang Lu nodded. When a cultivator reaches the unity stage, the 3 aspects of essence, qi, and soul are combined, and the primordial spirit and the body are mutually transformed. In other words, when Aya was alive, she was a unity stage expert? Speaking to this, Wang Lu was in awe. When she was alive, she was in the Western continent, so the laws there are different, so it can't be so simple. But in general, it should not be much different. Wang Wu said, but when she was alive, she witnessed the destruction of her country and the devastation of her people. Under the shock of her primordial spirit, she was actually unable to transform into a spirit of the brave departed. It was because she met a special condition that she could be resurrected. Simply put, it's similar to the big heart demon oath. She vowed to complete one thing, and before that, her soul will not fly away and scatter. Upon hearing this, Wang Lu has sorted out the ins and outs of the matter. That is, to find the way to win the war, and to recover the motherland. It's just that, when she was traveling in the 9 regions, she gradually felt that the way to win the war was elusive. Thus, she relaxed her big heart demon oath, and it was difficult to condense the body of the brave departed. Then, she met the sect elder, who used the power of the feng shui line and a special spell to stabilize her body. But she can't leave the mountain, right? Wang Wu said. In addition, the elder did her a big favor. Out of gratitude, she stayed on the mountain. A big favor? Full of sympathy and pity, Wang Wu said, actually, I just invited her to eat a big meal, and she was so moved. She came to the 9 regions alone with the body of the brave departed. For many years, she didn't even have a full meal. That was the first time she tasted the food of the 9 regions. She was so surprised that her soul almost flew out of her body. Later, she thought that she had received a great favor, so she decided to at least repay the favor before she died. She had a clear distinction between gratitude and grudges. Unfortunately, there wasn't much she could do on the mountain. Instead, her appetite was unbearable, so she ate a lot of food stored in the Spirit Sword Mountain. Later she felt ashamed, so she volunteered to take over the position of the head chef of the Misty Peak. She said that no matter what, she couldn't accept the favor of others for no reason. At the same time, such delicious food must be cooked by her own hands to be more valuable. As a result, as you can see with her special physique, she probably can't repay the favor in this life. In short, that's about Aya's story. If you can get a clue from it and liberate her, it can be considered as a boundless merit. Speaking to this, Wang Wu said with a rather playful smile, "How about it? Do you have the confidence to do it?" Wang Lu snorted. After hearing such a story, how could I have any other answer? In the autumn of the 6,356th year of the 9 regions, Wang Lu silently made a vow on the non-phase peak, determined to carry out a great plan. To save the head chef Aya. Chapter 279. Sister Aya, don't be afraid, a professional adventurer is here to save you. After hearing Aya's story from his master, Wang Lu made up his mind. Of course, determination alone was useless. Aya's experience was not a secret among the high-level members of Spirit Sword Mountain. The elders who were the same generation as Wang Wu basically knew the inside story, and many people sympathized with her. However, no one could really solve this problem. Among them, there was the matchless sect leader Feng Yin, as well as Wang Lu's master Wang Wu, who was superior to her disciple in all aspects. Although his master didn't say it clearly, according to Wang Lu's understanding, if she really had a way, she would not just stand by and watch. Even if she offered a sky-high price to blackmail him, she would not be completely indifferent. And since his master didn't make her move, it meant that she felt powerless. Similarly, the sect leader and the other elders didn't need to be said. So many capable people couldn't solve it, so how could Wang Lu solve it? In theory, this was an almost unsolvable problem. Aya's problem was at the level of the brave departed, which was at least equivalent to a deity stage problem. With Wang Lu's mere shoot-on stage cultivation, the difference was simply like heaven and earth. There was no room for technical maneuver. However, this matter was not completely hopeless. Although it was somewhat whimsical, after listening to Aya's life experience, a light of inspiration flashed in Wang Lu's mind. Although it was weak, it illuminated the darkness. Wang Lu was not an arrogant person who was blindly confident. Aspiration was aspiration, inspiration was inspiration, but when it came to actual operation, he had to be careful. Aya's situation was, after all, extraordinary. Right now, it could be said that her life was pinned on this mountain, in a delicate state of balance. If Wang Lu acted recklessly and casually took Aya down the mountain, once her soul flew away and scattered, 100 deaths would not be enough to redeem her. Therefore, before starting, Wang Lu carefully analyzed the known conditions, and then carefully deduced it in his bedroom. He didn't go out for 3 days. 3 days later, Wang Lu burned a large pile of papers and pushed the door with a smile on his face. He already had a well-thought-out plan. "Aya, I'm here again." With a casual greeting, Wang Lu once again pushed open the door of Ethereal Peak's cafeteria. Seeing the sincere smile on Wang Lu's face, even Aya, who was used to seeing storms, felt somewhat powerless. "You are here again?" Aya had rather complicated feelings towards this young man whose speech and actions were often unexpected. On one hand, she was annoyed by Wang Lu's persistent pestering, but after getting along with him for more than 10 years, how could she not see that Wang Lu actually had the heart to help her? Although the method was hard to accept, but he would probably give up after a few days. At that time, she would be able to regain her peace. Humph, this time I came with the belief that I will definitely win. Hearing this, Aya could not help but have a headache. Absolute confidence in victory? I'm afraid it's the integrity that will definitely fall. Wang Lu, this brat, is indeed not bad in nature, but he has too many crooked ideas, it's simply overwhelming. The previous few pestering already made me physically and mentally exhausted. What is this so-called absolute confidence in victory? For a moment, Aya even felt as if she had returned to a long, long time ago, on that desolate sword mound, facing the scene of being abandoned by her friends and family. She was also as powerless as she was now. However, after a moment, Aya was surprised to find that this time, Wang Lu was different. His expression was no longer frivolous, but incomparably serious. "Aya, this time, I came with the belief that I will definitely win." The same words, but the emphasis in his tone was on the word definitely win. Aya was surprised when she heard this. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. Of course I know what I should know.
Aya was somewhat surprised.
After all, although her body of the brave spirit was not taboo, it was not something that could be easily publicized. But if it was Wang Lu, since you know it, then please go back.
Wang Lu repeated again. I came with the belief that I will definitely win.
You.
Aya finally understood what Wang Lu wanted to say, so she remained silent and waited for him to continue. Because Wang Lu didn't seem to be joking. Moreover, if he made a joke about this, Aya would be very disappointed with him.
I have a way to win every war.
Ha! Aya unconsciously exhaled, not knowing whether to laugh or not.
She had been in 9 regions for many years, and almost everyone said the opposite. There was no way to win every war in the world.
Few people, like Wang Lu, dared to claim that they had it.
Of course, she had heard similar words several times, and all of them were swindlers with ulterior motives.
Aya didn't think that Wang Lu wanted to scheme against her. After all, she was no longer the king who had thousands of troops under her command. And with the current situation of Wang Lu, there was nothing to scheme against her. Did he say that to give her a little comfort?
Ha ha ha, unfortunately, she didn't like other people's sympathy or pity, because it was completely unnecessary.
No, I'm not playing the game of a caring sister.
I really have a way to win every war.
Wang Lu repeated his point of view again, and then looked at Aya with a smile. Aya's expression became more and more serious. Before you open your mouth to question, let me ask you a question first. In your opinion, if there is a way to win every war, what would it be? Upon hearing this, Aya was startled.
After thinking for a moment, she said, At first, I thought it would be a book that recorded the supreme and mysterious art of war, as well as other magical spells of the East. At that time, I heard that the Easterners were very good at war. In my country, the big battle that involved the fate of the country, in the East, was perhaps just a battle between mountain strongholds. However, in reality, I found that it was too exaggerated. The art of war in 9 regions does have its own uniqueness, but to say that the war must be won, Wang Lu said with a smile. Yes, how could there be a way to win every war recorded in a book?
If a book is seen by both sides, wouldn't that be a paradox? Aya nodded.
Yes, I have witnessed many wars in 9 regions, some between the people of 9 regions, and some between 9 regions and the people of Western continent. Some are wonderful, some are stupid, but no matter how I look at it, it's far from the way to win every war. It was also from that time that I had doubts in my heart. With that, she also took the initiative to ask Wang Lu. You see, if there really is a way to win every war, what would happen to 9 regions? I have also thought that if there is such a method, there should be an incomparably powerful empire in the 9 regions. The emperor would be good at war and conquer all sides. I have seen several such countries in 9 regions, but, obviously they don't have a way to win every war.
Of course they don't. Do they deserve it?
The way to win every war is very rare even in 9 regions. How could it be casually spread in the mortal world?
Aya, from the beginning, you have the wrong idea, so of course you can't find it.
The way to win the war is neither a book nor an oral formula, nor is it an ordinary landscape that can be seen in the 9 regions.
So, in your opinion, what is the way to win every war?
Wang Lu said, It's very simple. First, there must be an invincible person, and then there is a way to win every war. In other words, the so-called way to win every war is the summary of the life of an invincible person.
Aya was stunned for a moment. You're reversing the cause and effect, and it doesn't make any sense. No, this is the only correct way to say it. Any theory must be tested by practice.
Therefore, if there is no invincible person, then all the methods to win every war must be false.
This is not difficult to understand, right? In fact, when you look for an invincible country, it's also based on this logic, isn't it?
So what? If you agree with this, then we can move on to the next question. If you want to find the way to win every war, then you just need to find an invincible person, and I happen to be invincible.
The amount of information in Wang Lu's words was a bit too much.
Aya froze for a moment and then laughed in spite of herself.
You're invincible? But where did this come from?
Small fights don't count. The scale can be called war level.
Tell me, when did I lose?
As long as I seriously want to fight for it, when have I not been able to get it? Moreover, when did I not go through hardships in my adventure?
If you were in my shoes, could you do better than me? Aya was stunned and speechless.
Her life was also magnificent, and the storms she experienced were by no means comparable to Wang Lu, a young man who had just debuted for more than 10 years. However, if she were to say that she could do better than Wang Lu, she might not be able to. However, if she were to say that Wang Lu was invincible. For example, even if I challenge you right now, you don't have much chance of winning. Wang Lu smiled. First, what you are looking for is a sure-win method in the war, not a sure-win method in a small fight. Second, will you challenge me? The kind of life-and-death fight? Aya smiled. Indeed I won't, but, in short, your reputation of being invincible doesn't seem to live up to it. Wang Lu said, to be invincible, there must be a battle to determine victory and defeat. It is the basic skill of a wise man to not fight a battle that he is not confident of winning. If it were you, with only 3 to 5 personal guards, would you directly attack the enemy's army? I would, and I often win. Aya smiled. I know what you mean. Thank you for saying this. But Wang Lu didn't want to hear it. Don't be in a hurry to come to a conclusion. I know that empty words can't win people's trust. But regardless of whether it is true or not, it must be tested before a conclusion can be made. Whether I have a way to win a war or not, I don't have the right to say it, and neither do you. Only the truth counts. So Aya, I ask you to witness it with your own eyes. Witness it with my own eyes? Yes, I ask you to witness whether I am invincible or not. This. Aya wanted to say, I can't even leave the mountain right now, so how can I witness whether you are invincible or not? Moreover, whether you are invincible or not, what does it have to do with me? Seeing this, Wang Lu silently stood up. He looked up to the sky and said in a deep voice, I, Wang Lu, hereby swear that I will bravely move forward in this life and win every war I experience. He paused for a moment. Then, I will restore Aya's country. As long as the country is not restored, there will be no King Pill. You? Aya was shocked. She also stood up, her green eyes reflecting a look of disbelief. Wang Lu calmly smiled and said, So, can you follow me down the mountain to restore your country? Chapter 280. Congratulations on successfully poaching a gold guide. Nowadays, although there are many Western continent people in 9 regions, and there is no lack of influential people, I'm afraid it's not easy to find a guide better than Aya. Before she ascended the throne, she was already a learned nobleman. The queen has a broad vision and extensive knowledge. Moreover, because of her nature, she has an unusual interest in rare treasures. She is well known in treasure hunting, collection, and other aspects. Although she has been away from the Western continent for nearly 100 years, you don't need someone to help you find a fashion holy land, but a legendary immortal treasure. Thus, there is no more suitable guide than Aya. On the non-phase peak, Wang Wu patted her disciple's shoulder with emotion. It was really not easy to persuade Aya. In fact, she had also thought of the method that Wang Lu thought of many years ago, but unfortunately, she didn't have the capital to put it into practice. Although Aya had a paranoid side, she was by no means a stupid person. Trying to fool her with a set of sensational theory would only make her unhappy. The crux of Aya's problem was the way to win every war, so the quickest way to cut the tangled knot was to find a set of way to win every war. Wang Wu also thought of this in the past, but unfortunately, she couldn't be like Wang Lu, who fiercely patted her chest and vowed that she would win every war, and that her life trajectory was the way to win every war. Although at that time, she had already mastered the King Pill and had the title of the #1 King Pill in 9 regions. However, this cultivation came precisely from the crushing defeat in her early years. To say that she was invincible, she was not qualified. Similarly, the other elders on the non-phase peak were also the same. Only Wang Lu, the chosen one who won every war with irresistible force, was qualified to boast such words, and was qualified to bear the trust of Aya. Hey, it's still far from it. Wang Lu picked up the teacup, which was only a shallow layer of tea. He shook the teacup in front of Aya's eyes and said, Aya's trust in me is at most the level of this cup of tea. After all, she is an experienced and knowledgeable king, so it is impossible to convince her in one go. I can only do it step by step. But at least she agreed to go down the mountain with you. Yes, I can barely survive without the support of the earth veins, but it's only at the lowest level. Most of the time, she couldn't even maintain her physical body. I needed to prove myself through more victories in order to gradually restore her strength as a heroic spirit. However, this is not something that can be done in just 3 or 5 days, so for a very long time, she will probably only be able to exist as an old granny that you carry around with you. Speaking of this, I heard that in order to persuade her to come down the mountain, you swore not to take the king pill until you restore your country?
Wang Lu said it's nothing, right? Originally, he planned to postpone the king pill for a few years, so he could use this opportunity to increase Aya's favorability. That guy usually looks easy to talk to, but his heart is still very closed, so it's very difficult to get a favorable impression. Moreover, in this trip to the Western continent, it's inevitable that we have to deal with the local forces. If we can have the king as our backer, it would be more convenient. It's easy to say. Her country has been destroyed for 100 years. It's easier said than done to revive it. That depends on the standard of restoring the country. I have some confidence in this. In fact, in my opinion, Aya is the type that is easy to persuade. She is stubborn and has a strong sense of morality, which is very easy to do. The smile on his master's face became a bit thicker. Even the most difficult problem, it seems like you have a solution. Then, I only have one question. Go ahead. Regarding his master's continuous questions, Wang Lu was very patient. After all, in order to persuade Aya this time, the background information provided by his master was crucial. When can I drink your wedding wine? Puff. Wang Wu calmly used her primordial spirit to control the sword light to block the incoming tea. Seriously, you've been drinking that tea for so long, don't you think it's disgusting to suddenly spit it out? You're disgusting. Drink your sister's wedding wine. Wang Wu said with a smile. Haven't you thought about it? Although Aya's seniority is a bit higher, she's a bit short, her figure is a bit poor, and her craftsmanship is a bit poor, but it's undeniable that she's a rare beauty. Moreover, she has extensive knowledge, noble background, and powerful strength. The most important thing is that she has the body of the brave departed, so you don't have to worry about pregnancy. What else can you ask for? I will remember to convey these words to Aya. When she's protected by the feng shui line on the mountain, she can only exert strength close to unity stage. I wish you good luck, master. Humph, if worst comes to worst, I'll just wander around. Why would I be afraid of you? But seriously, you're not that young anymore. You're already in your 20s, so you should think about life's major event. Wang Wu said, took a sip of the tea, and then lightly said, you can't really be single for a lifetime, right? I see that although there are many beautiful women around you, the one that's really compatible with you is probably only Aya. Lu Li is like a younger sister. Bai Shixian is raised as a daughter by you, not to mention Zhu Shiyao. Wang Lu shook his head. Don't say that, Aya and I don't have a common view, so there's no future for the two of us. After thinking for a moment he said, at most, I'll be your mistress. Wang Wu gawked for a moment, and then she couldn't help but laugh. You really don't want to dive. What? Wang Lu frowned, and then his intuition told him that something was wrong. When he turned around, he saw Aya, dressed in white, holding a lunchbox, lightly standing behind him. Her indifferent face carried a touch of sullen anger. Then, a faint voice came from those two light pink lips. Mistress? Wang Lu thought for a moment, and in an instant, thousands of perfunctory reasons emerged in his mind. However, when he saw Aya's pair of clear eyes, all the hypocritical lies couldn't come out of his mouth. That being the case, he might as well tell the truth. Don't you want to do it, girl? The next moment, a lunchbox filled with all kinds of dishes came toward his head. It was already a month later when Wang Lu and the team left Spirit Sword Mountain. The composition of the team was not complicated. Wang Lu was the captain, Aya was the guide, and Lu Li, Bai Shixian, and Quan Zouhua were the team members. Initially, they also considered big sister Zhu Shiyao, but unfortunately, she has been named by her master Feng Yin to join the excavation management's team and went to the west as a follower. As for other people like Yu Xinyao and Wen Bao, although their cultivation base had made great progress in the past few years, because of the law of the two continents, cultivators below the level of King Pill would be greatly suppressed. Only Wang Lu and other successor disciples had the courage to go against the suppression of the continent's law in the Western continent. Over the past month, the team spent most of their time preparing various kinds of materials. Under the guidance of Aya, they collected a lot of rare treasures of the 9 regions, trying to be as prepared as possible. At the same time, they also made a full plan for their trip to the Western continent.
If you want to find immortal treasures, the first stop should be the Golden King's treasure house. According to legend, all the treasures in the world were collected there, but later on, they were constantly lost. Many of the legendary treasures actually came from the Golden King's collection. Of course, now it seems that this is just an exaggeration of later generations. After all, in 9 regions alone, there are many immortal treasures that are not later than Golden King. However, the Golden King's treasure house has always had a peculiar property. That is, it gathers all the ownerless treasures in the world. Any treasure, once it is out of the protection of its master, may be summoned by the Golden King's treasure house and appear there.
Hey, isn't that very powerful?
But Golden King has been dead for a long time, so the treasure house itself is ownerless. Therefore, many people will go to the treasure house to dig the inexhaustible treasure. In my lifetime, the place where the treasure house is located has been called Taba. Oh, by the way, according to the Gregorian calendar of the Western continent, on the 11th of November every year, the Golden King's treasure house will be more open, and the chance of finding the treasure will increase a lot. I believe there will only be more people who will go bankrupt there. Of course, although the treasure house is ownerless, there are still guardians. At the same time, all the people who die in the treasure house will become the guardians of the treasure house. Therefore, on the 11th of November every year, when a large number of treasures are excavated, there will also be a large number of adventurers who will stay in the treasure house forever. Speaking of which, it is somewhat similar to the group of immortal tombs that you are currently preparing to excavate. It can be seen that no matter what, there will always be some boring people. So, do you think the key to the group of immortal tombs is likely to be hidden in the Golden King's treasure house? Yes, because as far as I know, the treasure that best fits your description is the Sword of Golden King. That sword has never appeared in the Western continent, so it's likely to be hidden in the depths of the treasure house. At the same time, even if it's not the Sword of Golden King, because the time doesn't match. Since it's not known to me, the biggest possibility is that it's in the treasure house.
Very logical reasoning.
Then, let's go directly to Taba. At this moment, the advantage of bringing Aya with them was undoubtedly evident. As the king of a country in the Western continent, the information that she grasped was far better than that of ordinary people. For example, the treasure house of Golden King was indeed known by many people in the Western continent. However, the principle of the treasure house was rarely known, let alone the Sword of Golden King. As a matter of fact, the team assembled by the excavation management did not take the treasure house of Golden King as their primary goal. Because, in their view, the so-called treasure house of Golden King was just a heritage that had been excavated for many years, so it didn't have too much value of attention. The first stop of the excavation management's team was the knowledge capital of the country of dragons in the Western continent. They hoped to find clues in the Library of Endless Mystery, which was said to contain 80% of the knowledge in the continent, and then carry out a targeted search. The knowledge capital is indeed a good choice, but too much knowledge will only increase the difficulty of distinguishing and filtering. If we want to find the needed information there, I'm afraid it will take a long time. Of course, if we don't get the desired result in our first stop, then we still have to go to the knowledge capital. Rest assured, I have a hunch that things will not be that troublesome. The first stop will certainly have what we want. No, it's even more than expected.
Chapter 281.
Oh, it's more prosperous than the last time I came here.
It's simply earth-shaking.
On a spacious road, Aya, who was wearing a gray cloak, was surprised to see the tall buildings and endless traffic on both sides. Now, together with Wang Lu and the others, she had arrived at the westernmost part of the 9 regions, a city called Heaven's Road. As far as the eye could see, it was a bustling scene. This is one of the trade hubs between the East and West continents. Moreover, it's a newly built port city, so naturally, it's changing with each passing day. When you came here, it was just built 100 years ago. It's not much better than a small fishing village, but now it's a big city with a population of tens of thousands. In addition to the prosperity, what was even more impressive was the mixed and open culture of this place. With the development of trade, the communication between the East and West continents became integrated, and the birth of all kinds of cultural crystallization was even more eye-catching. Unfortunately, the group didn't have much time to stay here and enjoy the scenery.
Wang Lu's schedule was very tight.
When they arrived at Heaven's Road City, It happened to be the day when the mysterious Sky Mansion's merchant fleet was about to set sail to the western continent. Today, about half of the trade between the east and west continents was controlled by the mysterious Sky Mansion and its various chambers of commerce. After all, only a behemoth like the mysterious Sky Mansion had enough resources and manpower to organize cross-continent trade. The endless sea's deadly fog, as well as the endless sea monsters and demons, were not something that an ordinary chamber of commerce could deal with. Through the many years of cooperation between the Wisdom Sect and the mysterious Sky Mansion, Wang Lu successfully contacted the mysterious Sky Mansion's branch in Heaven's Road City. He made an appointment with the branch's fleet to set sail together with the merchant fleet to the western continent. This kind of fleet only sailed 2 or 3 times a year. If they missed this opportunity, they would have to wait for a few months. In addition to the mysterious Sky Mansion's fleet, although there were many other cargo ships, safety and other issues were difficult to guarantee. Through the contact information sent by the mysterious Sky Mansion, Wang Lu and the others found the captain of the fleet at the dock and were ready to set sail. However, as every seasoned adventurer was familiar with the law, in any adventure, most of the time was used to deal with unexpected situations. Wang Lu and the others just happened to encounter an unexpected situation. In short, you want to raise the price? The original agreement of 1,000 spirit stones is not enough for you? On the dock, facing the warm and humid sea breeze, Wang Lu smiled slightly, but there was no warmth in his smile. Standing in front of Wang Lu was a burly middle-aged man with dark red skin and luxuriously dressed clothes. He was the person in charge of the fleet, Nie Yang. As the vice president of the mysterious Sky Mansion's Sky Road City branch, Nie Yang had a very high status in Sky Road City. At the same time, he also had a good cultivation on the immortal Tao. Normal cultivators would treat him with respect when they saw him, but when Wang Lu looked at him with a cold gaze, he couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat and panic in his heart. Perhaps it's not wrong to say that they're trying to raise the price. In the end, Nie Yang was used to big storms and waves, so he calmed his mind and explained, but we really have no choice. Recently, the endless sea suddenly changed, and the risk has doubled. In order to deal with the risk, the fleet has made a lot of arrangements, and the cost of sailing has increased exponentially. The original agreement of 1,000 spirit stones is really not enough, so we had to put down our pride and raise the price. In fact, the price of 3,000 spirit stones is not enough to cover the cost. Wang Lu had no intention to calculate the cost with the other side. Instead, he sneered and said, "If there is no risk in the trade between the east and west continents, why would it be your turn to do it? You are businessmen, so you should understand the spirit of the contract." Nie Yang said, "The contract also stipulates that if force majeure occurs, we have the right to adjust the price." "Yes, and the definition of force majeure is also up to you to interpret." Nie Yang said, "Please believe that we absolutely do not intend to blackmail you, but we really have no choice. This kind of thing is also detrimental to the reputation of our mysterious Sky Mansion. If not for the fleet that set off from West Tomb Port some time ago, stirring up monstrous waves on the endless sea, we would not have to do this. In fact, there are not many fleets that are willing to go to the sea now." Seeing that Nie Yang refused to budge no matter what, insisting on tripling the already high fare, Wang Lu deeply frowned. Of course, he didn't care about a few thousand spirit stones. Perhaps it was a huge amount of money for ordinary cultivators, but his net worth was incalculable. Thousands of spirit stones were just like pocket money to him. But he really didn't like people raising the price. However, Nie Yang's temporary price increase was also reasonable in the contract. If it's difficult, it's better not to follow his fleet. In the silence, standing behind Wang Lu, a girl in a gray robe softly said. Wang Lu shook his head. The endless sea is vast and boundless, and the changes are endless. It's not unusual to encounter any situation on the sea. Without a skilled fleet to guide us, it's really difficult to cross the sea. The girl said, "It's not that difficult. When I came from the western continent, I crossed the sea alone. At that time, I didn't find a suitable fleet." Wang Lu was surprised. "Crossing the sea alone? You swam here?" The girl said, "I have the spirit's blessing, so I can walk freely on the water, so I came here directly. Of course, occasionally encountering tsunamis and huge waves will be more troublesome, but generally speaking, as long as I aim straight to the east, I will eventually reach my destination." Wang Lu sighed inwardly. No wonder not long after you arrived in 9 regions, King deserve it. Wang Lu had nothing to say. However, upon hearing the girl's words, Nie Yang inwardly disagreed and persuaded. It's true that brilliant cultivators can fly for a long time, but even if we don't consider the direction at sea, the giant monsters lurking in the sea are no small matter. Legend has it that even a Taoist master of Yuanying stage can't resist them. If we don't follow the fleet, it would be troublesome if we encounter the sea monsters. Wang Lu was also curious, so he asked, Aya, did you encounter a sea monster attack? Of course, but they were all expelled by me. However, there are indeed many strong people in the sea, so I occasionally feel uncomfortable when I fight them. When Aya crossed the sea, in theory, her strength was close to that of a Unity stage cultivator. But since she still felt uncomfortable, it was not something that Wang Lu's team could deal with head-on. That being the case, then let's get on the ship. Wang Lu shrugged. After paying half of the fare, Wang Lu and the others boarded the fleet. Nie Yang, the person in charge of the fleet, personally led them into the 5 superior rooms on the pilot ship. The rooms of Wang Lu and the others were specially modified. They were luxuriously decorated and spacious, occupying almost the entire floor of the huge pilot ship. There were only 6 empty rooms on that floor, 5 of which were occupied by Wang Lu and the others, leaving only 1 empty room. In fact, this was the main reason for the huge fare. Otherwise, how could a few travelers cost thousands of spirit stones? Shortly after the fleet set sail, Nie Yang eagerly came to find Wang Lu. On one hand, he hurriedly expressed his apologies, and on the other hand, he introduced them to a special neighbor. In this cabin, in addition to Wang Lu and the others, there was only one other passenger, and that was the one who followed behind Nie Yang. This is our navigator, Ayun. With a warm smile, Nie Yang pushed the girl next to him forward. She is our biggest guarantee of safety on this trip to the Western continent. Wang Lu was a bit surprised to size up the girl named Ayun. She looked only 13 or 14 years old, a bit like a mixed race. Her facial features combined the characteristics of both the Eastern and Western continents. The girl had long hair like a cloud, and her skin was white and ruddy, completely unlike the weathered sea people. At the same time, the girl's dress was also luxurious. Her whole body was spotless, and her short skirt was woven with the best spirit silk, which wrapped her tender but curvy body. Her limbs were exposed, and her wrists and ankles were adorned with precious jade bracelets. Around her delicate neck, there were 2 necklaces. One was a string of neat and clean shells, and the other was a string of huge round pearls. Most of the trivial jewelry contained a faint immortal spirit aura, which was definitely not a mortal object. Wang Lu carefully looked at the girl in front of him. At the same time, the girl also raised her eyes, looked at Wang Lu, and slightly nodded to him. Her posture was calm and generous, completely unlike a 13 or 14-year-old girl who was ignorant of the world. While nodding, Wang Lu saw that behind the girl's ear, there seemed to be a few pieces of scale-like thing growing. Nie Yang noticed Wang Lu's gaze, so he smiled and said, Ayun is a member of the Sea Tribe, the most professional navigator of the Endless Sea. Sea Tribe? Yes, legend has it that they are blessed by the heaven and earth. They were born in the Endless Sea, and have a unique perception and affinity to this treacherous sea. As we all know, the Endless Sea is unpredictable, and even the most seasoned sailor cannot predict what will happen in the next moment. But the Sea Tribe are keenly aware of the changes in the sea, and can warn in advance. Similarly, the vicious beasts living in the sea usually do not attack the ships of the Sea Tribe. Therefore, as long as there is a Sea Tribe navigator in the fleet, the danger of the Endless Sea will be reduced by 90%. Of course, with such ability, the price is naturally high. Don't look at Ayun's weak and timid appearance. If you want to invite her, it is impossible. Nie Yang stretched out his hand, and gestured twice, indicating 10,000 spirit stones. Wang Lu nodded, indicating that he understood. Nie Yang bringing Ayun to see them was obviously to explain why he raised the price. 10,000 spirit stones, TSK. Generally speaking, a fleet of ships can make a profit of tens of thousands of spirit stones. This was a business that risked one's life to do. But the Sea Tribe girl only needed to go out to sea to earn 10,000 spirit stones. Sure enough, knowledge is power. Nie Yang patted Ayun's shoulder and sighed with emotion. Under normal circumstances, we will not ask the Sea Tribe to come out. But some time ago, the fleet of West Tomb Port encountered sea beasts. The fleet carried many powerful cultivators. Relying on their strength, they didn't put down their offerings as usual and instead fought with the sea beasts. As a result, alas, the bandit-like sea beasts were wiped out, but they also provoked the anger of the vicious beasts in the sea. After the fleet passed through, the entire endless sea was not peaceful. Before that, 3 fleets were attacked by angry sea beasts and were completely wiped out. Now, without a sea tribe navigator, no one dares to go out to sea. Wang Lu waved his hand. All right, I know we don't need to spend money. We have already paid the down payment, and when we arrive at the destination, we will naturally pay the rest. Are you afraid that we will default on the payment? We are very strict with the spirit of the contract. We will not casually use force majeure as an excuse to change the contract. Nie Yang naturally smiled bitterly, and after a moment, he left with Ayun. Wang Lu watched Ayun's delicate and exquisite back gradually fade away, sighing in his heart. The West Tomb Port's fleet. Wasn't it the excavation management's fleet, led by Feng Yin Taoist master, with a particularly luxurious lineup, nicknamed the Dream Team, but in the end, it was simply a dream team. They had fought to their heart's content in the beginning, but they had left behind a terrible mess that implicated their descendants. He could only hope that the extra 2,000 spirit stones were worth it. Chapter 282. The days at sea were leisurely and comfortable. According to the scheduled voyage, Wang Lu and the others would arrive at the eastern port of the western continent after a month at sea. This speed was already quite fast. Without the guidance of the sea race girl Ayun, in order to ensure their safety, the fleet would likely spend several times more time to find a safe route on the ocean. Most of the time at sea was spent leisurely. After leaving 9 regions, the surrounding spiritual energy gradually changed, making it difficult for them to support their cultivation. Although it wouldn't cause them to lose their cultivation base, it was difficult to increase their cultivation base through meditation. Therefore, in addition to occasionally practicing their swordsmanship, most of the time was simply used for leisure. The life at sea was very fresh for them. Considering that they would likely face a difficult test after entering the Western continent, they might as well take this opportunity to relax and adjust their state. Among the several people, Lu Li was the happiest. She grew up in the Blue River region of Spirit Sword Mountain and had never seen the sea. However, for her, who was simple in mind, the boundless sea was not boring at all. Instead, it contained endless fun. Every day, she ran back and forth on the deck, sometimes flying on her flying sword, braving the wind and breaking the waves not far from the fleet. As for Bai Shixian and Quan Zhuhua, most of the time, they were quietly sleeping in the guest room. Perhaps it was because their bodies as immortal beasts couldn't adapt to the change of the continent's laws as quickly as human beings, so they needed a period of recuperation. As for Aya, she obviously had a strong interest in the sea race girl Ayun. She often took the initiative to talk to her, asking about all kinds of anecdotes about the sea race. Unfortunately, Ayun's response was very cold. Most of the time, she locked herself in her room. Occasionally, when she came out to breathe, she also ignored people. After being rebuffed several times, Aya could only suppress her curiosity. However, in the end, she couldn't help it, so she seemed particularly uncomfortable. Wang Lu, who was watching from the side, shook his head and said to Aya, "Your way of asking questions is wrong. No wonder she doesn't like to talk to you." Aya earnestly recalled, "Did I do something rude? I'm sorry, I don't know much about the sea race, so if there's anything wrong, please advise me." Wang Lu said, "I'll give you a demonstration, then you'll know where you're lacking." Then, Wang Lu brought Aya to Ayun's room and gently knocked on the door. The sea race girl coldly stood at the door and looked at Wang Lu. Her eyes revealed a questioning look. Wang Lu smiled and said, "I have some questions for you, 100 spirit stones per question, interested?" Ayun thought for a moment and moved aside to let the door open. He then waved his hand and said softly, "Please come in." Outside the room, Aya didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She didn't know if she was depressed or impressed. Wang Lu threw a mustard seed bag filled with thousands of spirit stones to Aya and said, "You can ask all you want, I'm going to the deck to get some fresh air." After a while, Aya reluctantly brought the empty mustard seed bag to the deck and approached Wang Lu. "Thank you. You're welcome." The two were silent for a moment. Aya smiled and asked, "Do you know a lot about the sea race?" Wang Lu shrugged his shoulders. "Not many. This is the first time I've seen a living sea race member."
Aya asked, so, are you good at judging people? Wang Lu nodded. Judging people? Not bad.
Then he looked at Aya and said, a cup, right? If it weren't for the fact that Aya's body was still unstable, she would have already started fighting.
Even so, Aya was still angry.
Her face was extremely gloomy, hidden under the hood, like a dark cloud that was about to fall.
However, at this moment, Aya's expression suddenly changed.
Ha! Just as he was feeling bewildered, a barefoot young woman sprinted to the deck. She was gasping for breath, and her face was gloomy and uncertain. Wang Lu stretched out his hand and said, Ayun? However, Ayun didn't seem to see Wang Lu at all. He just ran straight to the side of the ship, clung to the edge of the ship with both hands, and stood on tiptoe to make his upper body as high as possible. His vision was cast into the distance of the vast ocean. His eyes looked around, and his expression was full of panic. Wang Lu then turned his gaze, only to see that the left side of the pilot ship was calm. The warm sunlight sprinkled on the sea, like a layer of fragmented gold.
Is this urgent?
Aya took half a step forward, patted Wang Lu on the shoulder, and said with a sinking voice, Be careful, something is coming. A moment later, even the person in charge of the fleet, Nie Yang, came up and asked anxiously, Ayun, what's wrong? Ayun turned her head, her eyes filled with tears. The little girl nodded vigorously, then shook her head, but she didn't know what she meant. But then, without her explanation, everyone realized that a great disaster was about to befall them. The calm sea rose without warning, as if a towering mountain had risen from the flat land. A black mound suddenly rose from the side of the ship. The next moment, the sea turned into a waterfall and fell along the edge of the mound, revealing a ferocious giant beast. It was an extremely large sea beast with an inestimable size. It had a round head and a hard grayish-black shell. Below its head were dozens of tentacles, each of which was dozens of feet long. As the giant beast appeared, the tentacles slapped the surface of the sea, stirring up stormy waves, showing its great strength. Any one of these tentacles could crush the pilot ship into pieces. My God, such a big octopus. Seeing this amazing giant beast, Wang Lu was also shocked and involuntarily swallowed. The endless sea was full of dangers. He was tired of hearing this sentence in 9 regions. However, when he actually encountered it, it was still horrifying. Sea beast, it's a sea beast. Before long, the whole fleet fell into panic. The sailors' screams rose and fell one after another. Under the panic, the fleet quickly lost control, and the originally neat formation suddenly became chaotic. Looking at the sea beast that emerged from the water in the distance, Nie Yang's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. His well-maintained snow-white teeth were immediately bitten until they bled. Ayun, what's going on? Ayun's eyes wandered. Obviously, she didn't expect that there would be an uninvited guest on the supposedly peaceful route. As a member of the sea tribe, she had a basic sense of everything on the sea before going out to sea. Then, she could communicate with the creatures in the sea at any time to avoid those hostile sea beasts and storm-covered areas, and choose a peaceful area to advance. Just half a day ago, she had just completed a sensing and confirmed that there were no sea beasts wandering nearby. Why did such a big guy suddenly appear? Perhaps, ordinary sea tribe people might not even meet one in their lifetime. At this moment, everyone in the fleet felt a bone-piercing chill from the bottom of their hearts. It was as if they were going to be frozen. The next moment, a thunderous roar swept through the ship. Many sailors with mortal physiques immediately bled from their ears and fainted. Even Nie Yang screamed as his breathing became chaotic due to the roar. Wang Lu and others were not hurt by the sound waves, but after the roar, Wang Lu couldn't help but frown, because he felt that the sea beast seemed to be saying something. It said that it smelled our scent from thousands of miles away, so it immediately rushed over. It also said that it has been waiting for this moment for a long time. Bai Shishwan's voice faintly sounded in his primordial spirit, translating for him. Wang Lu was surprised. Little Bai, you can understand it? It's probably because it's a beast. Bai Shishwan somewhat self-deprecatingly said. It seems to be seeking revenge. Damn, when did we become enemies? Is it because we ate mustard octopus for lunch? At the same time, Ayun, who was clinging to the side of the ship, suddenly moved. Although the girl's face turned red and white, obviously not feeling well, she successfully resisted the shock of the sound waves. She stood firm, looked back strangely at Wang Lu and others, and then suddenly grabbed the plank of the ship and jumped up, seemingly wanting to jump over the ship and into the sea. Aya reacted the fastest, stepped forward to hold the girl down, and warned, "The sea is more dangerous. We will do our best to protect you here." Ayun struggled hard, constantly trying to get closer to the side of the ship, and screamed, "Let me go, let me go." "Calm down." Aya stretched out her hand and firmly suppressed Ayun. Although she was less than 1/10,000th of her peak, she could easily suppress an ordinary girl. No matter how hard Ayun struggled, she couldn't get away. "What are you doing?" At this time, Nye slowly came back to his senses and exclaimed, "Let her go. Otherwise, all of us will die." "What?" At this time, the sea beast had finished its opening remarks and was rushing forward with all its strength. Nye said in horror, "Let her go. Otherwise, we will all die. She is the most important sacrifice to quell the anger of the sea god." Sacrifice. Whether it was Aya, Wang Lu, or Bai Shixian, none of them were stupid. They immediately understood Nye explanation. No wonder. No wonder the price of the sea race was so high. No wonder the little girl was covered with jewels and dressed herself as if she was going to be buried. It turned out that in addition to the navigation task, the sea race was the last insurance for the fleet. In case of a shipwreck, such as a sea beast attack or a storm, the sea race could sacrifice themselves as a sacrifice to the endless sea to quell the anger of the sea. The sea race have already made up their minds before going out to sea. If you stop her, you will only drag everyone down with you. Even Ayun himself will be ashamed. "Let her go, it's too late." Nye roared and made a final effort. Aya, on the other hand, calmed herself down and said to Wang Lu through primordial spirit communication, "Wang Lu, help me, save her." Wang Lu was surprised. "Help you save her?" Then he pointed to the octopus sea monster. "Are you saying you want me to fight this kind of question mark monster alone?" After a pause, Wang Lu said, "Aya, don't be such a saint. Although Ayun is indeed very pitiful, this is her duty, her destiny, and her consciousness. Everyone will die one day, don't take everything on yourself." Aya said, "This is not taking everything on myself. This sea beast is coming for me. 100 years ago, when I crossed the endless sea, I encountered it and seriously injured it. Now it has recovered and is coming for revenge." Ayun is one of the most outstanding descendants of this generation of the sea race. Her perception and navigation will never be wrong. If it weren't for me, she wouldn't have encountered this kind of fatal situation. I can't absolve myself from the blame, so it is my duty to rescue her. But I don't have enough strength now. Wang Lu was shocked. "Aya, do you really have to value a lover over a friend? Ayun's life isn't meant to end, so I deserve to die?" Aya quickly explained, "I know this sea beast can't stop you. You have been preparing for so long on the mountain. Although there will be a price, but I beg you." Wang Lu helplessly said with a smile, "Since you've said it like this, then I'll go forward bravely. After all, I promised you that I would be invincible. Let's just treat this as our first battle." Aya nodded. "Thank you. Although my strength is meager, I will do my best to fight side by side with you." "Fight side by side? That won't be necessary," Wang Lu said and cut off the primordial spirit communication. At this time, the sea monster had already rushed to the side of the pilot ship. Then, Wang Lu calmly took out something from his mustard seed bag and raised it in the air. It was a spirit sword heavenly talisman, but it was obviously different from ordinary heavenly talismans. The talisman light flashed, and a white figure appeared from the light. The next moment, a layer of emerald green light cover enveloped the entire pilot ship. When the giant beast hit the light cover, its mountain-like body was bounced back and fell into the sea. "TSK, it hasn't been long since we left, but you already called for outside assistance. Little Lu, can you do it?" The voice in midair was a bit concerned and a bit teasing. If it wasn't Wang Wu, who else could it be? Chapter 283. Transforming the Spirit Sword Heavenly Talisman to achieve the reverse transmission effect was one of the most powerful cards in Wang Lu's trip to the West. The Spirit Sword Heavenly Talisman was not bound to herself, but to her beloved master. Once she was in danger, she could activate the talisman with her master's magical power and send her over. Generally speaking, Most of the sects would leave this life-saving means for their elite disciples, which could be used to call the elders for help at the critical moment. However, once they left 9 regions, because of the change in the law, these talismans would be difficult to take effect. Only the Spirit Sword Heavenly Talisman could ignore the change in the law of the continent. However, according to her master, because she had transformed the talisman, the transmission effect was not permanent. It could only bring her master over for a cup of tea's time at most. Moreover, the law of the endless sea was ever-changing, so the transmission time was even shorter. However, no matter how short the time was, it was enough for this powerful summoned beast to clear the battlefield. Although non-phase method was famous for being good at defense and bad at offense, people who were familiar with Wang Wu must know that the general principle was completely ineffective against her. This time, the battle was even more appalling. In just a few breaths of time, Wang Wu had wrapped the vengeful angry octopus with an emerald green sword light, and then carried it back to non-phase peak through the channel opened by the Spirit Sword Heavenly Talisman, leaving only a string of hearty laughter echoing on the sea.
Ha ha ha.
Alas! Watching his master's back disappear into the channel opened by the Spirit Sword Heavenly Talisman, Wang Lu sighed deeply. Aya, who was beside him, was still secretly shocked by the battle just now. After a moment of silence, she asked, "What's wrong? Why do you sigh?" "I'm worried about Master." Aya was even more curious. "Worried about your master?" "She has an overwhelming advantage just now. Not to mention returning to Spirit Sword Mountain is her home field, so there's no danger at all." Wang Lu said, "I'm worried that she, a leftover woman who has been single for more than 100 years, would carry such a big tentacle monster back. Under her insatiable desire, she might do something immoral and damage the reputation of my Spirit Sword sect." "Your thinking itself has already hurt the reputation of Lingjian School." Aya couldn't bear it anymore. But very quickly, she changed her mind and thought, "It's because that talisman is very valuable, right? Is your heart aching?" Wang Lu shrugged. "It's not bad. If I sell it, I can probably get a few 100,000 spirit stones." As soon as these words came out, not to mention Aya's surprise, Nie Yang exclaimed, "Hundreds of thousands of spirit stones. This is throwing money at them." The value of this entire fleet was no more than hundreds of thousands of spirit stones. After all, the fleet itself was still stuck in the mortal world, which was a world of difference from the top immortal level ships of the mysterious Sky Mansion. Wang Lu's Spirit Sword Heavenly Talisman was equivalent to making a fleet disappear. Thinking of this, Nie Yang lamented, "This is too wasteful." "Waste?" Wang Lu keenly captured Nie Yang's meaning and could not help but frown. Nie Yang looked at Ayun, who had just escaped from death, and shook his head. "Young master has a kind heart and can't bear to see Ayun buried in the sea. This kind heart is indeed touching, but the fate of the sea tribe is like this. Even if they can escape this time, one day, they will walk on the same path. And the hundreds and thousands of people of the sea tribe make a living. All of them disregard their lives. Can young master be so generous to save people every time? Alas, although my words are cruel, young master's action really doesn't have much meaning." Wang Lu smiled and said, "The beauty of rich people is that they can always use money to do meaningless things. On the other hand, if you can't spend money to do meaningless things, why are you a rich person?" Nie Yang was stunned for a moment, then sighed with emotion and didn't say anything more. Wang Lu cast a glance at Aya and meaningfully said, "Rich people are like this, but isn't it the same for those with power? If you don't do things that others think are meaningless, what's the use of money and power?" Aya couldn't agree, "That's just a pointless show-off and waste. It's not the right way. In fact, no matter which continent, there is no custom that advocates waste." "Hey, Aya, you're too naive." "Naive?" Aya sneered and even disdained to refute. Even though she had experienced great setbacks, she was still a proud queen. Naive? Wang Lu didn't have the qualification to evaluate her like that. However, Wang Lu didn't intend to say anything. Seeing that Aya ignored him, he kept his mouth shut. Aya paused and asked Nie Yang, "Will we leave any future trouble for you after we repel that sea beast?" Nie Yang replied, "There won't be any future trouble. That giant octopus obviously acted alone, so no one will come to seek revenge after we killed it. That day, the West Hill fleet killed a group of sea beasts, which made the sea god angry. At worst, we'll stay in the western continent port for a while and then return." It's good that there won't be any future trouble. Aya finally felt relieved. As she spoke, although she did not say it clearly, her body, which was originally wavering between real and illusory, gradually solidified. Later on, there were no similar accidents. Under Ayun's almost perfect navigation, the fleet bypassed all the risks in the endless sea and safely arrived at their destination, the port city on the east coast of the western continent. Nie Yang led the fleet to unload and rest at the port, while Wang Lu and the others went ashore, ready to start a new adventure. Before leaving, Ayun took off her 2 necklaces and gave them to Wang Lu and Aya. The more expensive pearl necklace was given to Aya, and the shell necklace was given to Wang Lu. Obviously, although the little girl was taciturn, she clearly knew who gave her life. At first, Aya insisted on refusing it. After all, that octopus came for her. However, Ayun was unusually firm. She kept kowtowing on the ground. Finally, Aya took a step back and divided the pearl necklace into 2, only taking one, which made Ayun reluctantly nod. After saying goodbye to Ayun, the group entered the port city of Deep Earth City. As one of the trade hubs between the East and West continent, Deep Earth City was no less prosperous than Heaven's Road. The city was also full of high-rise buildings and traffic. The unique culture of the Western continent was too much to take in. However, what really caught people's attention was the law of the Western continent. For the natives of the Western continent, this so-called law was invisible and colorless, silently moisturizing. However, for the cultivators from 9 regions, this law, which was very different from the 9 regions, made people feel particularly uncomfortable. It was like creatures that were used to running on land were suddenly sunk into the sea, or fish in the water were dragged ashore. The great change in the environment was simply suffocating. This was the wall of law, which prevented most cultivators from going to the Western continent. Cultivators below the level of King Pill could hardly pass through the wall of law to display the various magical abilities that they cultivated in the 9 regions. Even the strength of their bodies was greatly reduced. During this period, it was even more difficult for them to cultivate, making them completely useless. Generally speaking, only cultivators above the level of King Pill could retain their cultivation base after crossing the sea. Because when they advanced to the level of King Pill, they would condense the main path on the King Pill, so that their jade mansion would be unified, like a small world, endlessly growing and multiplying, without the need for external force. However, even if it was a cultivator above the level of King Pill, if their foundation was not solid enough, they would also be weakened by the wall of law. Only those at the nascent soul stage or soul formation stage could completely ignore the influence of the wall of laws, because at that level, cultivators would have great comprehension and integration abilities. Even if they were in a strange environment, they would be able to use their own abilities to deduce and adapt to new laws. Among Wang Lu and the others, only Bai Shixian could barely be called King Pill level. Wang Lu and Lu Li were still in Shudan stage. However, as successor disciples of Lingjian school, their foundation was deep, so they didn't really care about the wall of law. In particular, Lu Li was the fastest to adapt. Soon after they disembarked from the boat, she gradually adapted to the law of the Western continent. Although the flying sword in her sleeve was somewhat sluggish and erratic, she could basically revolve around her as she pleased. Wang Lu cultivated non-phase method, so his magical power was restrained, not revealing anything. Walking in the Deep Earth City, he looked calm and composed, except that occasionally, he would stop for half a step to adjust his breath. According to Master, before the King Pill is formed, there's no harm in seeing more laws. And under the suppression of the law of the Western continent, persevering in cultivation would yield twice the result with half the effort. Aya and Wang Lu walked side by side at the front of the team. Listening to Wang Lu's words, she couldn't help but nod. You are indeed more hardworking than you look. No wonder you have such achievements in just 10 years of cultivation. Wang Lu said, genius is 99% IQ plus 1% inspiration. Hey, it seems like there's no place for sweat? Aya couldn't help but laugh. Wang Lu said, it seems like you're in good condition now? After all, this is the land I'm familiar with. Here I can feel that my strength is slowly recovering. Aya closed her eyes, clenched her fists, and then softly said, I'm back. Upon hearing this, Wang Lu gawked and then frowned. Are you going to eat first or eat me first? Under the guidance of the native Aya, the group found a small shop in Deep Earth City, but it was a shop with a hidden mystery. According to Aya's introduction, This was a branch of a secret chamber of commerce with tentacles all over the eastern part of the western continent. With a special seal, she gained the trust of the owner and saw a special purchase list in the basement. Then, Wang Lu bought a high-end carriage with a large amount of gold and other hard currency that he had prepared in 9 regions. The carriage was pulled by several nightmarish beasts that tread on flames. Their speed was astonishingly fast, and when needed, they could fly into the sky or burrow into the ground. Moreover, the interior of the carriage was also transformed by the spell of the western continent, making it very spacious, which was similar to Wang Lu's private bus, Lingyun 2000, in 9 regions. The purchase of the carriage was to facilitate travel. In the western continent, many of the magical treasures refined by 9 regions were difficult to use. Moreover, in order to be less conspicuous, it was best to disguise as a local traveler. After coming out of the shop, the group boarded the carriage and headed west. According to the plan, they would stay in the next city for a while and then go straight to Taba. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.